Okay, we are being recorded, so many of the senators have other things that they are doing right now, but we are not going to wait. We'll start off with the House people, but remember, many of us have been either at some of these briefings or whatever, and that's why, you know, something that would normally take you hours and hours and hours, we hope that you will be able to fit in the time allotted. So with
Why are you
that-
looking at me?
I was looking at all four of you, but, you know, so don't feel. And with that, I will call the Senate Finance Committee meeting to order, and we'll have the House describe their budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senators. Representative Ken Weiler, Chairman of the House Finance Committee. This was quite a challenge. We were handed the governor's proposal. We put HB 1 in our other bill. We put HB 2 on it and filed them, and then took a look at them and waited for the Ways and Means Committee to come back with revenue estimates. And I have a great deal of faith in Ways and Means and House Ways and Means, because I've been doing 15 budgets and they're usually pretty close, sometimes 2%. So we took a look at what they gave us for revenue estimates, and it was 800 million different from what the governor's budget presented, which we knew was going to be a big challenge. We've faced bigger challenges before, but we have to keep coming up with new ideas. So we sat down to look at that challenge, and some of the things that made it a little easier for us, I went to the treasurer and asked her how many paychecks she'd done in each department, and over a period of a year. So I had a pretty good idea when they come in with a budget that says we need 122 people, but you've only had 112 paychecks for the last year. I know we've got some room there to make some cuts. And some of these positions were funded but vacant, and had been vacant for a while. So there was some savings there. Another thing I looked at that hadn't been adjusted in more than 25 years was some of the fees. We looked at what it cost to register a car. And they went back 25 years and discovered it hadn't been raised even before the 25 years, but they couldn't go back any further. So we said it's time to raise the cost of registering a car. And that was a pretty good amount of money, even though we didn't go all the way up with where it should have been, but it brought in another 40 million, which most people wouldn't notice. Much has been made of the cost of a vanity plate. I remember when I first got a vanity plate, it was $5. And a few years later, it became 20. I still got it, because $20, big deal. It's a vanity plate, I want to have it on my car. And I see a lot of cars driving up and down the road with vanity plates, so going to $60 is even less of a bump than when it went from 5 to 20. We also looked at some of the other fees, and of course the Fish and Game Department has about 12 dedicated funds. And many of them had not seen increases in a while, so that was another place we could bring in a little extra money for Fish and Game. Both Fish and Game and Highway come to us frequently and say, we need more money and you've got to take it out of general fund. We hoped by doing those things that we wouldn't need to give them any general fund dispensation. So those are some of the things. We even looked at Department of Ag, and there were a lot of fees there that hadn't been raised in quite a while. So that helped us out with balancing the budget, but we still had to make a lot of cuts. Some of the things we looked at, if there was some other way to do something, some other source of revenue, or if it was unproven. We keep hearing that the money we spend on travel and tourism, it's about a $7 million that we spend annually on advertising. Oh, we can't live without it. Well, it's a $5 billion business, and they do a lot of advertising on their own. So I don't think the $7 million that we'd spend would make that big a difference, and it might be a good chance to see if it did. So one of the things I pointed out is I can remember that the mix of revenues that we do have has always stood us very well. I remember when the economy has done poorly nationally, our meals and rooms tax went up. How come? all the Northeast people that normally go to Europe in the summer and West Coast for skiing in the winter came to New Hampshire that year and rented a place in the lake and went skiing in New Hampshire. And so our meals and rooms taxes went up in bad times. So those are some of the good things, whereas friends of mine that rely on 60% in other states on their revenue for income tax, 60%, boy, do they have a problem when the economy goes down and their revenue on income tax goes down 20%. So we have a good mix of things, and even though we've done this budget pretty much without an interest and dividends tax, we do find in this briefing budget that there's about $8 million left in late payments on interest and dividends. But normally it's about a $200 million. But we've managed to get by without it. So we have a lot of people. We have 25 people. I'm not the only one with 15 budgets behind me, and many of our people have multiple terms in finance, and it shows. We have hundreds of hours of experience to work on this budget, and so I hope you respect that time that we spend and look at what we've done and realize that it did some studying, and some changes had to be made, and Division 1 had most of the departments, so Representative McGuire is chairman of Division 1. He will give you some of the details that they had to go through in all the departments that they dealt with. But this was a concerted budget. We did a lot of things that we're happy to answer questions on and defend what we did. You know, people come from, you've killed the arts. You know, there again is a multi-billion-dollar operation. So if you don't have money from the state, it isn't like you go out of business. And some of the things we've done to increase gambling revenue also makes opportunities for tax exempt organizations like a lot of these theaters and museums and so on to get on the roll for some of the gambling money. I visited the casino at the Brook over in Seabrook and said, "How's that charitable gaming going?" He said, "Well, if it's an important thing, almost national, we give them the whole 10 days. And he said, Angel Flight, we had a lot of respect for them. We gave them all 10 days, and they made almost $200,000 in their take from the charitable gaming. If it's more of a minor thing, we might give them 3 days and might spread them all through the year and see what happens. And one of the groups I'm in makes almost $30,000 from that with just 3 days. So there's going to be more opportunities in charitable gaming rather than having us use state money and general funds to bankroll some of these places. So anyway, I'll let Representative McGuire, my vice chair and the chair of Division 1, give you more details of the Division 1, which he had most of the agencies.
Well,
Any questions?
Since the senators may have questions, if there's general questions, we'll take those now for you, and then we'll get to Representative McGuire.
Very good.
Do the senators have any general questions? That was simple. Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Dan McGuire. I represent the town of Epsom. Before I get into the numbers, I want to, we handed out this 3-page document. There's an awful lot of policy positions that were added to House Bill 2, mostly from the House. There's actually one Senate bill. There's 34 House bills and one Senate bill that we put into House Bill 2. And so if you want, this is like a little index that Ms. Rollins of the LBA put together for us to show you where in House Bill 2 all those little pieces came from. So, and where they are now, because many of them are in your other committees. So I won't talk more about that unless you have questions. Mainly, I want to talk to the surplus statement. As Chairman Weiler's mentioned, when we got the budget maybe 7 weeks ago, we had a $770 million problem. it was, if you compared the revenue that our House Ways and Means Committee told us we had to spend in general and education funds compared to what the governor wanted to spend in general and education funds, there was a $770 million gap. And a large part of that gap was already in fiscal year 2025, the current fiscal year. So as you can see from the first page of the surplus statement, the governor had assumed that $81 million from the rainy day fund would close that gap, but we found it was more like $149 million. So on day one of this budget, the rainy day fund is being decreased to $143.7 million, which is less than half of what it has today. We were able to move a little bit of stuff into 2025 to moderate that, but it's still a huge difference. And at the end of the day, we were not able to put all that back. Of the $770 million problem, we've left you with, I'd say, maybe 10% of it or something like that. So there's plenty of work for you to do. I would not recommend you pass the budget as is. Okay. Let me start with revenues. So we closed the gap both with cuts to spending, but also with revenues increases, fees and gambling, but also with some savings, right? So some dedicated fund type of revenue. So let's go to page 2. Schedule 1 is just the difference between our Ways and Means and the governor's Ways and Means. You can see there's significant differences there. Let's go to page 3. Revenue adjustments in Schedule 2. So as the chairman said, we looked at a lot of fee increases. Some of them affect the general fund, some of them affect other funds, but then we're able via back of the budget ways to get those into general funds. And so judicial branch increased their fees to the tune of roughly, looks like 5.4 million for the biennium. This next bit, DAS, all right, so Lakes Region's facility sales. So there had been something in the governor's budget when they sell the Laconia property that it would go to buy Granite Place, the other building there. We took that out. So that's assuming that the sale from Laconia is now part of the budget for other purposes. Dedicated funds. So we put a 5% assessment on revenue going into dedicated funds, not all dedicated funds, but a select group of them. This could use a little more, we used the LBA's list, but we could and probably should spend some more time on that. If you want me to, I could schedule a meeting of the Joint Committee on Dedicated Funds to go through the list and make sure that all of them are appropriate for this purpose. But basically that got us $32 million from dedicated funds. Again, it's money going into, not any existing money in those funds. The next two are, or the next three items there are related to the Education Trust Fund. It's basically just moving the allocations around. I'll let Representative Irf talk to those. Treasury Meals and Rooms distribution. So right now, 30% of the Meals and Rooms tax is returned to municipalities strictly on a per head basis. So it's based on the population in the municipality. And we froze that at fiscal year 25 levels. So we assume that Meals and Rooms tax is going up, but we froze the municipalities for the next 2 years at the level that they're getting this year. And so that gained us about 9 million. we basically had a House bill to return all the money from the renewable energy dedicated fund to the ratepayers. And so we delayed that by 2 years and took all the money for the budget. That's this 10 million. The Department of Agriculture came up with some fee increases, including one new fee, which is a $5 charge on transfers of pets. And they inspect the people who store and sell pets. And so this helps offset that cost, which was a general fund cost. But there are other general fund fee increases in that little bit there. Liquor enforcement. So we took out the Group 2 members of the Liquor Commission and turned them into, so it's strictly going to be licensing, not enforcement. It's going to be a licensing division, not an enforcement division. That's $6 million there. There was dedicated spending. So one thing that I personally seriously object to is off-books program spending, because it's sort of an out of sight, out of mind. When the law says, move X percent of this from here to there, it tends not to come through us at budget time, and therefore we don't give it as close a look as we do on other stuff. And so there were 2 of these sort of dedicated movements of money from the liquor funds. One was to the alcohol treatment fund, and one was to Granite Advantage. And we basically took those out, left the money in the general fund, and Division 3 actually looked at those things and budgeted them directly. Medicaid recovery revenue, I guess Division 3 will talk about some of these other things here. And then the safety, Division 2 can talk about those. And lottery terminals. So one big thing that we assumed, so there's money coming from the switching from historical horse racing to video lottery terminals. And we assume, based on discussions with the Lottery Commission, that the amount to be collected per terminal is higher than what the governor expects, okay? And because we have few more months worth of data, and they've found that they're very popular and very productive. And so I think we're assuming both that there will be more such terminals and also that the amount collected per terminal will be higher. You passed Senate Bill 83, which dedicates a quarter of that revenue to special purposes, and I think that's a bad idea. We moved all lottery money, including this, straight to adequate education. So there's no constitutional issue. All lottery money will go for education, not for other special purposes like the governor wanted or like your Senate Bill 83 wanted. So I think that's going to run into tough weather in the House. Anyways, so that's it for revenue. Maybe I should stop and take questions. There's some other fee changes, particularly to DES, but some of those are in other funds rather than general funds, right? So, yes.
Some years ago, we had a 300-page audit of the Liquor Commission, and it was especially critical of the Enforcement Division. They had badges. They'd been to police standards and training. Their job was to go and inspect 1,400 different serving places to make sure they weren't serving people who were underage or drunk. And that was their job. What they were critical of in the audit was they were out doing sobriety stops and that sort of thing. And so in an earlier version of the budget, we took out their law enforcement ability. The Senate added it back. As follow-up to that audit, I wanted them to keep giving us reports, especially about enforcement. What I got back were very brief statements of, oh, they were present at the scene of an accident and likely saved a life. And another one similar to that about they assisted in law enforcement of this. And I said, these people want to be policemen, then they're in the wrong place. We need more state troopers, we need more corrections officers, we need more local police, and we need more sheriffs. We don't need people that's supposed to be investigating liquor serving places out on the highway looking for drunks. And that's basically what they were doing. So the same thing occurred again, and the reports I got back from the Enforcement Division, I was unimpressed with. They still weren't doing it. And at one point, I think in the audit, they disclosed that of the 1,400 places they were supposed to be inspecting, they'd only done half of them. But one particular bar they'd been to 35 times. So I'm not impressed with the Enforcement Division, and I hope you will maintain the fact that they should go back to being inspectors and replace people with a badge with people that know how to do the inspections. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll point out that OPLC oversees licensing of 70 or so professions without any Group 2 enforcement. They do it with regular licensing professionals. Okay. Any questions?
From the senators?
Yes.
Senator Berthel.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. Who then, if you've gotten rid of all of the enforcement individuals in the liquor arena, who's responsible for enforcing the liquor laws?
So there will still be licensing type enforcement, just as there is for doctors and plumbers and all other things that are licensed. It's just that they won't necessarily be law enforcement. So if someone needs to be arrested, there are local police and there are state police. But in general, these things are licensing type things. They shut down businesses for periods of time. They pull licenses and things like that.
So it's going to be on the backs of the municipalities to enforce some of this stuff?
There are very few arrests in this kind of area.
Okay.
Senator Roseman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question. Do you have a list of the dedicated funds that you're taking the 5% administrative fee? Could you share
Yes.
that with us?
That list is a section of House Bill 2, I think. Yes, I will.
I think what's in HB2 is the accounts that are not being pulled. The 5%
Oh, yeah, it's a negative list.
It's a negative list.
I'm looking for the positive list.
Yeah, I'm sure that the LBA could work on that for us, yeah.
There's over 300 of them, and I think by the time they got through, you can't touch this one, you can't touch that one. There were very few of them. I expected to get more money, but we're only taking the money that would have gone in with the assumption it's already up to what it needs to be. Some of these funds, as they get to a certain level, money lapses into the general fund anyway. So it's not like we're grabbing money out of a fund that's building up. Most of them, as I said, were exempt. So we're taking, either they're already up to almost what they should be, and here comes a little more money, we've taken a little bit of that. So the majority of them were exempt.
Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't have time to do it yet, but I do think maybe a meeting of the Joint Committee on Dedicated Funds could look at the list and hear from people about their particular funds if they're concerned.
Senator Pearl.
Thank you. Thanks for coming in, taking my question. You talked about fee increases in agriculture and safety and a few others. Is there a list of all of the fee increases that we can review to see what they are?
Yeah, I think it's,
Right here.
yeah, this is something that I'm sure LBA can provide for you. I don't have one myself, but yes.
Additional questions? Back to you.
Thank you. So let's go to appropriation adjustments again, on page 3 of the surplus statement, and we'll walk through these. I'll start with House Bill 1, line 28 here. Basically, for a lot of our little agencies, the legislative branch, the governor's office, and so on, we did back of the budget reductions of little bits here and there. Same thing with DOIT. We gave them a 5% back of the budget cut, but it's a cut in total funds because they're very hard to budget as far as I'm concerned. But this is what we assume is the general fund part of that. Same thing with Secretary of State. Now, the judicial branch, this is a very, it's the second largest agency in Division 1, and its budget has increased quite a bit over the years, and we're asking them to make some cuts, and it will possibly close a couple of branch courts and some courthouses, and it may also cause them to have some layoffs in staff. We actually added to the judge pool 2 judges to make up for some cuts in smaller agencies that I'll talk about in a moment. But it's their budget is just a single number. We don't, their employees are not part of our normal personnel system, and it's hard to, we don't budget sort of accounting unit by accounting unit with the judicial branch. We just give them a certain number. So this is a back of the budget cut. Same thing with justice, although with justice, you see 2 very large numbers on line 33. They are scheduled for these kind of huge increases in their grants. Apparently they were in charge of giving out a whole bunch of federal grants that the feds have cut back on. And so the governor put into the budget essentially replacing those federal grants with state general funds money. And so we think that's inappropriate, but we wanted to give the Attorney General the flexibility of choosing to what's the right level for these grants versus other spending in the department. So this is a significant change to the department. Now, the department as a whole, their budget has doubled in like 6 years. If you look at between the governor's budget and what we passed 6 years ago, so there should be room for cuts, and I think mostly in the grant area. But that would be up to the Attorney General to make those changes. Okay, so. A little bit of change to Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, a back of the budget cut for Department of Environmental Services. Now, in that area, Department of Environmental Services, we added quite a bit in new fees. And so you may want to take a closer look at this one, because I think possibly the fee increases are greater than these reductions. And that wasn't something I intended, but it's possible that that's what happened. So there may be some other room there. Okay, DHHS stuff I will let Division 3 talk about. Scholarships, there are 2 different scholarships that turn up in the Treasury's budget, and we stopped both of those, and Division 2 used one of them for university spending, and the other one we used for general fund spending. Okay, Group 2 retirement. So this is a very big deal. It's something that some members of the House really want, and as well as the governor. What this is doing is, if you're familiar with the Group 2 system, retirement system, the employees are divided based on the date, July 1st, 2011, into what's called Tier A, Tier B, and Tier C. Tier A's are the people who were working and vested, had been in for 10 years on July 1st, 2011. Tier B is those who are working but not yet vested on that date, and Tier C were the ones that were hired since that date. And we made significant changes to the retirement system on that date because that budget was very tight, maybe even more so than this one. And two of the things we did in general, one was we changed the multiplier for the pension from 2.5% to 2%, okay, for the Tier Bs and the Tier Cs. Nothing happened to the Tier As, the people who were vested on that date. The second thing we did was we added restrictions on how final compensation is calculated to remove what's called spiking. Spiking is when someone, through working a lot of overtime or other special duty and things like that in the final years of their employment, they greatly boost their pension because the pension is based on the compensation in just the final few years. And so one thing we did was we changed a 3-year average to a 5-year average. That helped a little. We eliminated the use of unspent sick leave and vacation leave from counting in that calculation. We made the amount of overtime that can count in the calculation limited by the career average of overtime, not just the 3 or 5 year average of overtime, things like that. And so what this budget item does is over time it converts all Tier B members to being Tier A. So Tier A members still have spiking, and that because that never changed for them. They didn't have any changes. And so they still are able to boost their pension in the final few years of their service. And they also have the 2.5% multiplier instead of the 2% multiplier. We didn't change the governor, well, we made a couple of mild changes to the governor's proposal, but essentially it's there in total, and it still has that structure of converting all Tier Bs to Tier As. It's very expensive. You see here 55 million for the biennium, right? But what's in the House Bill 2 is to spend this same amount for the next for 10 years, right? So for the next 4 budgets plus this one, so we're talking about 280 million or something like that. It's very expensive, and the number of employees who are in this group is a little over 1,500. So it's something like $150,000 per employee. It's a very big benefit. And it does nothing for the Tier Cs. So one of the problems in this area is hiring for corrections, for state troopers, for local police and fire. And this does not improve the pension at all for anyone hired after July 1st, 2011. So that's another thing that I think this could be seriously improved, and it's something you should think about closely. Okay. Now, the YDC settlement.
Do you want to take a question on the
I would be happy to, sure.
Sure, so I'm trying to get to the 27.5 you have in that line item. When I spoke to the governor's office and just got my document from them this week, they're at a $25.6 million, $1.4 million difference annually. Is that something you know about or you've heard about?
Yes. So the actual analysis from the retirement system is that this is a little bit of an overpay for those because the number of employees is a little less, et cetera. The retirement system doesn't do an official analysis until after you pass a bill, I guess. It's one of these, you have to pass the bill to know what's in it kind of things. And so, so this number is a little higher than it needs to be, not a huge amount, maybe 10% or something like that. So,
Thank you.
Just to elaborate on that,
sure.
with my experience, that the actuaries will give you an estimate, but they won't actually do the calculations. The calculations are done for up to 10 years. That doesn't mean the expenses end at 10 years. It's just that they stop the calculation at that point. Is anything I said contrary to anything?
No, I believe that's all correct. Yes.
Thank you.
And the other thing I should point out is effectively this money is a transfer from the state to municipalities because 80% of these employees are municipal employees, not state employees. Some of them are corrections and state troopers are, and some, there's the state fire marshal and things like that, but most of these employees are municipal employees. Okay, other question? We're happy with that? Okay. Okay, YDC. So, as you may recall, the state has been sued by many individuals for abuse suffered at the Sununu Youth Development Center over the years. And so we passed something 2 years ago to set up a settlement fund for those victims. And to date, I believe $160 million have been put into the settlement fund, but it was sort of set up with the assumption that $75 million per year over 10 years was going to be put into the fund. The governor did not put anything into the budget for this fund, but we think it's a serious issue, and so we put some money into the fund. First of all, the AG's office asked us to fund one particular settlement at the amount of $10 million. That's for a victim named Gilpatrick, and we did so. And then we put in $10 million per year for the next 2 years, well short of the $75 million amount. Now, this is something that's an active discussion item between the AG, the governor, the settlement coordinator, et cetera, and the legislature. And I think those numbers should be higher. But to get to the level that they might need to be, namely the $75 million per year, we're talking about an extra $130 million. Now that's a big, big number. I have in my back pocket a way to get that kind of number, but it's not something that we decided to do. If you decide to do it, there's it's basically more gambling, right? So if you want to go that route, I have an amendment available to you. It does get big bucks, like what's needed here, but it's a big decision.
I remember years ago when we would put money in the Attorney General's fund to be there if he got lawsuits. And his caution to us was, don't put too much money in there, it becomes a target. Unfortunately, that's what has become. The Attorney General first came to us and thought he could settle all this for $100 million. Then he comes back and says $500 million after we've given him $100 million. And that becomes a target. And many of us have witnessed both on TV, on radio, these law firms advertising and promising, like typically $250,000. Come in if you've ever been abused. Give us a call. We'll take care of you. This becomes a feeding frenzy for these lawyers that, oh, wow, I want a piece of that. Because they're all getting about a third of all the awards. And in some cases, they're getting it up front while we make the victim have time payments over 10 years, which we also discussed with the administrator. We didn't think that was right. They should all get time payments on an equal basis rather than the lawyer getting it up front. It just becomes too much of a temptation, and that's why we're seeing all these ads on TV. but that's something, if we put too much money in there, again, it becomes a target. Thank you.
And the total number of cases, do you have that number?
It's projected to be about 1,500. We'll know better. The settlement fund has a date, July 1st of this year, when people have to apply for a settlement. So they can't apply after that date. When that date happens, then we'll have an account. As I understand it, the average settlement has been in the $500,000 range. So that's where the 750 comes from. It's 1,500 cases times $500,000, 750 million.
I think it's approaching the total number that would be eligible, like 2,000 would be eligible. And it's just, here they are advertising, oh, come on in, we'll get you some money.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm not so sure we're hearing true statements.
Okay. Are we happy with that? Okay. Not happy, but it is what it is. Okay. Let's continue. So then we have line 42 here on page 4 is, that's the Renewable Energy Fund. They talked about that. Line 43, we had allocated in the previous budget $18 million to rebuild the Cannon Mountain Tramway. They're not ready to put out a contract on that, so they didn't spend the money, and their current plan is to actually borrow this money, which I think is perfectly appropriate, rather than to allocate it directly. And so that left $18 million unspent. We simply moved it from, the governor had it in spending for this budget, but we moved it back to fiscal year 25, where it more appropriately is unspent, and therefore we take a little less from the rainy day fund in fiscal year 25. It's just a movement. It's nothing real new. There's a bunch of DHHS things I let them talk about. The last one's page 50, line 51 and 52. These are monies that the House Finance Committee had cut from the budget for the Division of Travel and Tourism and the Welcome Centers that were put back on the floor of the House last Thursday. So thereby taking even more from the rainy day fund. So that's certainly a place where you could look to possibly restore these cuts. Okay. The main other thing that I wanted to talk about as far as Division 1 goes is Department of Corrections. So the Department of Corrections is the largest department in Division 1. Its budget in general, all general funds, or almost all, I think is, if I remember right, about $175 million a year. So it's huge. And what we discovered was that the current number of inmates is much lower than it was 10 years ago. We currently have under 2,000 inmates. 10 years ago, we had 2,700, so about 35% more inmates. And the number of employees of the department is 150 greater than it was 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, with fewer employees, like 16 or 17% fewer employees, they were in charge of 35% more inmates. So therefore, clearly, there's a disconnect, and we had to sort of right-size that. So we put in 150 specific cuts of employees into the budget, and none of them are corrections officers. They are others, right? So there's a lot more teachers, social workers, cooks, et cetera, in the department. And as part of doing this job, I now have an online database of all state positions. So there are maybe 13,000 filled state employee positions. And so I was able to use that to help select employees to cut to get the savings that we needed in the Department of Corrections. I don't consider the list that's now in House Bill 1 to be final. I did the best we could, but it's only about 90% right We now know a little bit more information about which accounting units are more important than others, and where some of these employees exist and things like that. And I also now received just today historic information from 10 years ago about who exactly, what positions were in the department. So I need to do more work in this area to make a more final list. So I would hope that you'll let me do some more work in this area, give you better information to put in the budget than what's there now. It's not horrible, but it's not quite right. So this is something that I'm actively working on. I also have historical information from the Department of Justice, because I'm just trying to figure out how is it that their budget has doubled over time. But in general, if you're looking for any department, like I said, I now have an online database of all positions, it's effectively a full state org chart. So for every position, I know who the supervisor of that position is. I know what fraction of the pay of that position comes from general funds. I know the accounting units, the names of the positions, not the names, not individual names, but the titles of each position, what each one does. So all that is available to you if you want it. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Senator Birdsall.
Thank you, and thank you for taking my question. So is it accurate what you said, that you did not target any of the corrections officers in there?
So sort of, with one exception, and that is some of the corrections officers work as what they call investigators or detectives, because as you can imagine, in prison, a lot of prisoners make complaints against officers. And so what we understand is that in the past, there were, and so what happens when somebody makes a serious complaint is an officer is put on administrative leave, and then there's an investigative position, which is an officer who investigates the complaint. And so the number of officers who work in this area as investigators used to be like 6 or 7 or so. Now it's 16. So we cut a significant number of those positions, but all those people in those positions can work as regular corrections officers. And there's a huge shortfall in the number of corrections officers. All of them work mandatory overtime. So they all work not just 5 regular shifts a week, but they tend to work another 2 or 3 shifts a week of mandatory overtime. So there's room for hiring and so on. The original budget that we got presented from corrections had no overtime in it. It had a lot of unfilled corrections positions that were funded, but it had 0 overtime. We converted half of the unfilled funded positions to overtime in the same accounting units, just to be a little bit more accurate, because they're not ever going to hire that number of new corrections officers. But we left about half of the vacant positions available for new hiring. I doubt they'll be able to, they're not hiring at that kind of level, but hopefully there will be some new hiring. There'll be positions for some of these investigators to move into.
Follow up?
Thank you for that. Don't they use a number of the unfilled positions to cover the correction officers' overtime?
Oh, yes. Yes, and that's exactly what they do. They move money from funded, unfilled positions into overtime. We did that for them to some extent, right? We took half of that money, made it into overtime money, because I know they're going to be doing overtime, right? Okay. But we left the other half as vacant, unfilled funded positions.
Thank you.
Senator Rosenwald?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did Division One or House Finance and House, how many filled positions in corrections did you eliminate?
We eliminated, I believe, 150. Some of them are part-time, though, so I think the full-time ones, it's more like 100, but I would have to check. I do have all that data, but off the top of my head, I don't have it. That leaves about 750 filled positions.
Thank you.
Senator Pearl?
Thank you. So when you were looking at these investigator positions, are we removing some of the workload that they had to do, or how did you determine that they would have enough staff left when you were done to do the work that we require them to do?
Yeah, so we have information from various sources that not necessarily something I can talk about in public, to guide us on what's needed and what isn't in the department. Also, the Coach Committee is doing direct interviews with employees and finding the same kind of information that we have. So, so the answer is yes to some degree. Right? So.
Thank you.
Senator Lang?
So in these 151 positions, were there any that were in agreement with the commissioner themselves? Commissioner Hanks, did you have conversation with her? Were there any agreement between these positions?
No. And so part of the reason we essentially lost confidence in the commissioner. And so based on this sort of other information we got, that's we found very credible. And it's unfortunate, but that's what we did this on our own, I would say, with the help that I talked about.
Back to you.
I think I'm more or less done with Division One. If there's any specific other small, I guess not quite. So small agencies. So we eliminated from the budget duplicative small agencies, and including, I have a list here, the Housing Appeals Board, the Child Advocate, the Human Rights Commission, and the, well, Council on the Arts, we eliminated that. That's not duplicative, but we also combined the PELRB, I think that's what it is. The
Public Employment Labor Relations.
Yes, the Public Employment Labor Relations Board, the Personnel Appeals Board, and the Right to Know Ombudsman. Those are small agencies that have a similar structure. They have a few employees that help organize things for a part-time board, and the part-time board is paid on a per-case basis. And so we converted the Right to Know Ombudsman from a full-time job to a part-time job, and then combined all those three so that they'd have a common staff, and then the boards would be paid on a part-time basis. The Human Rights Commission, we simply eliminated it because their performance was horrible. If you read the last performance audit, it's really bad. We allowed existing cases to go to court without fees, and we added 2 judges to the Superior Court to help take the load off of that. Child Advocate, again, it seemed duplicative to us. Essentially, they're a separate agency that takes complaints for the DCYF, and DCYF has their own complaints area, and there were some problems there that we heard about, so we eliminated that one. Similarly, the Housing Appeals Board. The Housing Appeals Board, not that they do a bad job, but they do very few cases. I think they made like 33 decisions last year, and at a high cost, $330,000 or something. So we're talking about $10,000 per case. Superior Court handles even complex cases for about $1,500. So there's no comparison between the cost per case of the Housing Appeals Board. We had in our budget the same thing for the BTLA. The BTLA is even more expensive. They made 57 decisions last year at a cost of about $20,000 a decision. So like 1.2 million is their cost per year. So we're talking about $20,000 a decision. And so we had also eliminated them, but the floor of the House put them back. So that's another place where possibly you could make some changes. So that's it for small agencies.
Senator Bertzel, you have a question?
I actually have a couple of them, thank you.
Well, Senator Lang will wait. He's next on the list.
All right, so the Office of Child Advocate, seeing that Hampstead is getting the Youth Development Center and all the issues we've had in the Youth Development Center in Manchester, don't you think we're going to need the Office of Child Advocate to oversee what happens at the YDC, the new YDC?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I guess just from a management structure thing, I think we need good leadership in the YDC and DCYF and all this sort of thing. And so if it's a leadership problem in those agencies that are causing bad performance, it doesn't make sense to me to say, okay, we'll leave all you and bad performing people in place and we'll start another new agency over here, right? And somehow this new agency is just going to talk you into doing the right thing. The whole structure just doesn't make sense to me. It seems to me we ought to make that agency perform correctly with the right leadership.
No, that doesn't always happen, but the other question I had was the Housing Appeals Board, which, I've had some of my municipalities want to get rid of it. However, the members that are working there are part of unclassified, so you got rid of the board, but we're still paying the members.
Yeah, there's some expense, and you'll see that in the budget. I don't think it was that large. We considered, by the way, the same thing with the special education advocate, but that person does have a 5-year contract, and so therefore there was no point in eliminating that one, even though I personally think that that's duplicative as well. But the Housing Appeals Board did have a fair amount of staff, so there are savings there. It's worth noting, last year we created a special Superior Court position just for things like the housing appeals, planning board type cases and BTLA type cases. And the judge who was appointed to that position was a member of the Housing Appeals Board, and so is very experienced in that area. And it turns out, court is very expensive, right? Judges are very expensive, but these things, HAB and BTLA, are even more expensive, so.
Senator Lang.
Sticking with those two topics, the HAB and BTLA, did you factor response from a resolution for the citizens into your decision at all? Again, my understanding is in the case of HAB, it's a 6 to 8 month time frame for resolution of a case versus in court, it's 12 to 18 months for resolution of a case. Did you factor the fact that the citizens are going to be waiting for a longer solution or a longer answer to resolution?
Yeah. Maybe a little, but I'm not convinced by that argument. Again, we just added a new justice, a new Superior Court judge just for that activity. So I would assume that whatever backlog there is, they're working through it and speeding it up because there's someone dedicated to that, somebody who's familiar with the area and so on. But again, our job is to be cost effective. And so, we felt we have to look for things that are needs over wants, right? I mean, any dollar you spend here, in my mind, we're cutting, you'll hear from Division 3, we're making serious cuts to areas that are much more critical, in my mind, than these particular areas. So,
Another comment is who pays. So the people overturned our decision on Board of Tax and Land Appeals because anybody can go for $40. That's all you pay. But it's costing us, as he said, multiple thousands for the taxpayers to pay for those 40 or 50 cases that were settled. What do you think is more correct? That the person that benefits from the hearing pays for it, or that everybody pays for it? That's the decision.
Follow up?
So again, I go back to effectiveness. So BTLA deals with things like someone's not given their proper deduction in their taxes, their property taxes. And so a citizen uses the BTLA to file a complaint, say, hey, the municipality didn't give me the benefit I was due. And if going by the way of the court system, it's 12 to 18 months before that citizen, who ultimately may be found right, has to wait to get a resolution, compared to 6 to 8 months. And the same with the HAB. You know, we know that HAB hears cases where a given person may want to build a house or do something, and a zoning board or planning board gets in the way, and they think it's an improper application of law. So they go to the HAB, which, by the way, I think if you do that, you do away with your process to be able to go to Superior Court. It goes straight to the Supreme Court on a ruling of law if you choose to do the HAB, and gets the Superior Court completely out of it. But that citizen who's looking to build a house, a developer that's looking to build the project, gets a 6 to 8 month resolution as compared to 12 to 18 month resolution. And the old saying in business or personal is time is money. You didn't factor any of that into this decision?
all right.
Maybe we should raise the price for going to the Board of Tax and Land Appeal.
So first of all, as far as the BTLA is concerned, the House agreed with you. They're not eliminated from this budget. I think they should be. But the House disagreed with me, so.
It's been $40 forever.
Yeah, anyways, but as far as the HAB is concerned, well, again, very few cases, a lot of money. I just recently left my planning board. My planning board was sued in the HAB. We won our case as far as the planning board goes, and the suit was baseless. So if this aggrieved person had to go to court, I think they would have, and we would still get the same outcome. So to me, budgeting is about priorities, right? It's about trade-offs. You have to spend, you have all the things you can spend on, and you have to decide what's the most important, okay? For me, the HAB is not near the top. It's that simple.
Certainly, this is an interesting topic, and I have some suggestions that I'll probably bounce off of you outside of this meeting, trying to maybe move both of those organizations that we're talking about right under the Superior Court and let them administer and at least make a preliminary ruling trying to get these cases moved along. But we will do that outside of this and then present anything we come up with to the group. Yeah. All right, so we're done with Division 1?
I'm very happy to help this committee in any way they would like for this point forward. Thank you.
All right. Come on down. And I'll let you do your own introductions.
I'm Representative Keith Lerf from Ware, Chair of Division 2.
I'm Representative Jess Edwards. I'm from Auburn, representing Rockingham 31.
So the chairman stole most of my thunder for the first few, so I'll just touch briefly. the highway fund and the fish and game fund, which are part of Division 2. The highway fund,
Should we be looking at any particular document? I know the surplus statement is what,
so you can look at the highway fund surplus statement, but you've already seen it, so you'll probably be able to relate to what I'm going to say. We essentially had one big goal, which was to eliminate basically make up the difference and going forward in the governor's budget. So, and those will bring in $15 million in the first year, since the fee increase won't go into effect until January 1st of next year. And in addition to that, it also allowed us to address two priority needs, at least partially address two priority needs of the department, and that is winter plowing and incentives for winter plow drivers. As you all are probably aware here, many of you on fiscal, that's something that typically happens in the wintertime. The Department of Transportation comes to fiscal for more money for those two areas. So even with those additions, we were able to continue to keep the highway fund in surplus. And just to mention out not the motor fee increase, the vanity plate fee increase. Uniquely among all the fees that we increased, that one actually, the additional funds flow into the general fund. So that was actually able to help us with our general fund reductions there. And then switching to the fish and game fund, similar kind of situation. That was also running a deficit and was expected to continue running at a deficit. So there we increased, so they have a bunch, we were advised not to specifically increase fishing license, hunting license, snowmobile license, since that brings a lot of revenue in terms of tourism coming in, and we didn't want to go for a couple of, they have a bunch of dedicated funds, I think it's a dozen, and we raised fees in two of them and captured the additional revenue, not the base revenue, but the additional revenue into the fish and game fund. One of the things I learned after the fact was that one of those, I believe it's called the, I'm going to get the name wrong. Anyway, it's related to wildlife and fishing, and that fee apparently is also charged on top of the fishing license fee. So if that's a concern, I might want to look at that. The other thing we did there was, in the case of three funds, the two that were related to the fee increases and the third one, we are sweeping the amount of money in excess of $750,000 at the end of this fiscal year, so June 30, into the fish and game fund. So that pluses up the fish and game fund, and hopefully between that and the fee increases, we should be able to run the fish and game fund in surplus going forward. And we also were able to address a couple of their priority needs as well, given those extra revenues. So if there are no further questions there, I'll just go on to education.
questions? Senator Lang?
So again, you added a $5 fee to every fishing license for the mitigation fund or something.
Is that the one?
Yeah.
Okay,
So-
that was not it was not by design. By the way, none of these, we did not select neither the motor vehicle case, the Department of Safety case or the Fish and Game Fund. We asked for suggestions from the departments in terms of which fees to address. So that was one of the ones they suggested we address. I did not understand the connection to, I'm not a fisherman, I'm not a hunter, I'm not a snowmobile rider, I'm pretty much useless in these departments.
All right, continue.
Okay, so now I will switch to education, which is the other really big part of Division 2. And probably, I guess the place to start, I can go back, well, I'll just go through in the order of your pages, because I think Representative McGuire mentioned on page, Schedule 2, I think it was the third page, lines 5, 6, and 7, he talked about the business tax, tobacco tax, and real estate transfer tax distributions. And I'll touch on this in more detail later, but those ratios were changed from so this is a split between the money that goes to the general fund and the money that goes into the education trust fund. In the governor's budget, those splits are 66 general, 34 education trust, and we switched it to 70-30. And I'll get into why we did that further on.
That is page, excuse me, that is page 3, and those line items are good when you tell us those.
I had them correct, didn't I?
Yeah.
Okay, all
You
right.
did fine.
So then, skipping ahead, Schedule 2, line 50 is education related. That was something that the department suggested we allowed to lapse at the end of this year, so we did. And then I'll go to the Education Trust Fund, and this, I won't discuss particular lines, I'll describe what we did in the education adequacy formula. So, as you're all aware, I'm sure, most of the education dollars go to adequacy. And we did not touch it for the first year of the biennium, so coming up fiscal 26, stays exactly as it is under current law. In the subsequent year, we made 2 changes, one of which had a cost, and the other which was neutral as far as cost goes. We increased the per pupil funding for special education by about $1,000, a little over $1,000. And that is a $28 million cost in FY27. And associated with that, you all probably recall the governor increased the budget for catastrophic aid or special education aid. That's the part that, if to the extent that kids are extremely expensive, you sum all that up across the state, and that's what that budget goes to. And this year, as we're all aware, the budget fell short of what was necessary, and so everything was prorated at 68%, which is a very unusually low number from what I understand as far as proration goes. So one of the things that we changed was putting a floor under that of 80%. So that would be the minimum proration in the biennium. The second part of what we did with education, sorry.
Senator Lang
Yes,
has
sir.
a question on that point.
Yep, just to make sure, again, the proration amount, if there's a deficit that's below the 80%, is that just create an open warrant for the commissioner to be able to draw from the Education Trust Fund up to the amount necessary?
Correct, but not a wide open warrant up to 100% is the idea.
Only up to 80%.
Up to 80%, yeah.
Thank you. Continue.
So the other change there in the adequacy funding formula had 2 parts to it. The last biennium, you all, I believe it was right here, put in a new right side of the equation called Senator Lang, can you help me with no, but the actual name of the, thank you, the Extraordinary Needs Grant. And one of the impacts of that was a pretty stiff bias towards large districts with lots of free and reduced kids. So basically, the Extraordinary Needs Grant was based on 2 things. One, the equalized valuation per pupil, but also the number of free and reduced kids. Manchester in particular saw a over $30 million increase in year 1, which is behind us, or now we're in that. A further increase, I think, not a further, but a greater increase, 32 million the next year, and then up to 42 million in FY27. So we felt that was probably, and that represented like a 38 to 40% increase that they were given. So we capped that based on we just based on the grant amount, and that allowed us to add another component to the right side called fiscal capacity aid, all by itself, which was strictly related to the equalized property valuation alone. So basically, the low property value towns that didn't also happen to have a lot of free and reduced lunch children who were really hurt by the changes that were made in the last biennium. And I think we distributed that, I think, across the lowest 40, if you will, of those towns. And the net effect of those 2 changes was neutral. In other words, it didn't increase the costs. I'm going to stop at that point.
Senator Lang has another question.
It's okay, this is my area of the budget I dealt with. So again, the idea behind this is that you could have a town that has low equalized valuation, but still have a significant number of students, and their ability to raise taxes is less because of the low equalized valuation. And this is to balance that out with the other argument, which you have a high property poor town plus a town with people who have a high amount of free and reduced. And therefore, it's not about the equalized valuation as much as it's about the poor students. right? And this is a balancing of that effect.
Yes, and I should add that the cost, if you will, was about $12 million to Manchester. So they're still at a $30 million level above where they were 4 years ago. And that $12 million was then redistributed across, as Senator Lang described.
Thank you.
All right. Any further questions there?
I don't, oh,
Yep.
Senator Rosenwald.
So in this new formula, Manchester will lose $12 million.
Well, lose is one of those relative terms. They were 30 million over, let's go back 4 years, or before the previous budget. They're 30 million over that now. They're 32 million over that next year, and they'll be 30 million over that the following year. So they'll lose, I guess, $2 million. They won't gain the extra 10.
Thank
All right.
Good.
Continue.
Okay. So now, why don't I look at schedule, the next page, schedule 3. And Chairman Weiler referenced this. I'll just point it out to you. So let me speak something before I get to this. So the other thing we did with the Education Trust Fund itself, well, actually, there are a couple of things that happened here that should be described in more detail. You heard about the video lottery increases. And one of the things per our Constitution that is required is that all lottery funds must go to fund adequacy. Well, actually, no, even more than that. Must go to fund local public district schools. So apparently that's one of the things that has been bothering folks for a while, that we don't actually segregate funds that way. That is, they go into the Education Trust Fund, and we always spend more than we get from lottery on adequacy. So money's fungible, what's the big deal? But it was suggested that it makes more sense to restrict the funds from lottery specifically to a restricted fund. So not only the funds we've been bringing in, but also these additional revenues as well. So you'll have the Education Trust Fund, and you also have this restricted fund as two components working together. So I wanted to mention that. So that's one piece. The other thing that we did with what was coming out of the Education Trust Fund, we limited it to local district public schools, charter schools, EFAs, something to do with the courts, and I'm missing court order placement. Thank you. and another piece. So we restricted to the basics. From what I understand, historically, what was historically coming out of the Education Trust Fund, and the other things that were coming out of there, we moved back into coming out from general funds. So then coming to Schedule 3. We wanted to balance that. So that was removing essentially expenses, if you will, from the Education Trust Fund and putting them back in the general fund. So we wanted to balance the revenues going in. So that is what I discussed at the very beginning when I mentioned this, the 70-30 split instead of the split that the governor, or 70-30 split, instead of what the governor had, which was 64-30. In this Schedule 3, you can see the reduction in the taxes going in. So that's why I wanted to draw your attention to what we did here relative to what the governor did. And I think that, unless I missed something, I think that takes care of my.
Senator Lang.
It's my other favorite topic, gaming.
Oh, geez. Just so you know, this is not my strong suit.
So again, I just want to counter a statement and just kind of ask a question whether you got a legal interpretation. Again, when the discussion is made that all money from lottery must go to education. At the time,
Not just education, but locally. Yeah.
Okay. So again, at the time that constitutional amendment was passed, we had a gambling commission, we had a horse racing commission, and we had a lottery commission, which specifically dealt with your Mega Millions type of typical lottery, what you think. So traditionally, that's not been the position of the state. That lottery money, while I say I agree that the Powerball and the Mega Millions are lottery activities and therefore 100% must go with that. Traditionally, that's not been the history of this state, nor the interpretation of that constitutional amendment.
Okay. So that's a fair point, and I was not driving this decision, and you all will be working with the people who thought it was a good idea, so you could bring this up with them when you meet.
Thank you.
I'm sure they'll be glad to address that for you. Anything else, sir?
Oh, Cindy.
Thank you.
Excuse me,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sort of two questions. Is special education now coming out of the general fund?
No, special education is, so the adequacy formula includes it includes the base adequacy of roughly $4,000 a student, includes special education per student, includes free and reduced per student, includes all of that stuff. That, in fact, is not only, that still comes out of the Education Trust Fund, but more specifically, at least a big chunk of it, we're guaranteeing comes from, I'm going to call it lottery. But so yes, it's still in the Education Trust Fund, it's not coming from the general fund.
But the catastrophic aid?
The catastrophic aid.
I don't believe
That might be
it's
the
called
one that I was missing
catastrophic
when I
aid.
named 5.
Well, what
It's a
what
different
I
aid.
It's called it's called special education aid. I'm with you, Senator.
Is that
I-
general
I think
fund?
that might have been the one that I was missing coming out of the Education Trust Fund, but I'd have to verify that to be sure. When I rattled off the 5, I knew I only got 4 of them. I think it might have been the 5th one, but I'll confirm that.
Okay.
When the Department of
Follow.
Ed comes in, we can ask that question then.
Thank you. Can I follow up? So you were trying to balance the spending and the revenues in the ETF.
Yes, ma'am.
But when I look at page 5, it seems like there needs to be a $26 million draw
That's actually
from
on,
the general fund at the end of the biennium.
yes, ma'am, that's right. It's actually on page 1, but you're right.
Okay.
And yeah,
It's also on page 5.
that was intentional as well. The idea being to zero it out at the end of the year. So that the intent here, the reason we did all this, to go into a little more detail, I don't want to take too much of your time, but it's really, as you all are probably aware, this current last year, there was a huge surplus in the Education Trust Fund and not a lot of funds in the general fund. And of course, the Education Trust Fund cannot just be, we can't pull money out of there for use in other needs that the state may have. So just from the point of view of good fiscal management, we felt it was much more wise to keep funds in the general fund because we don't know what's going to happen, well, like this year, where we're running a deficit now. So the intent there was basically to use the Education Trust Fund for its intended purpose, and by the way, as I'm sure you're all aware again, whenever there's a shortfall, if you will, in the Education Trust Fund, it's an automatic draw from the general fund. It's not like the money can't just flow right in there for all of those purposes for which we spend on education.
Okay.
As I introduced myself earlier, I'm Representative Jess Edwards, and I chair Division 3. I'm not really sure how you all do your work across the entire budget all at once. I'm going to deliver what I think is a Division 3 centric perspective. And so before you go flipping through documents, I'm not going to go through a document right away. I just want to contextualize my takeaways from, the 6 to 8 weeks of budgeting that we did and what kind of decisions you all will have before you. For context, the governor spent $1.1 billion of general funds in Division 3, and in an early Finance Committee process, Division 3 was asked to shoulder a $290 million reduction from the governor's budget, which gets us around the 810 level effectively. And a shorthand way of looking at that's about 75 cents on the dollar. So we had to spread 75 cents on a dollar around, and this is a classic example of there being unlimited wants and limited resources. I am not happy with this budget. It's my third budget, and I wish there were more resources, but wishing didn't do it. So we did find some resources, and I'll go into that. But in order to deal with the limited resources aspect and the allocation of those, we had to create some pretty clear priorities that would guide us. And we said that we would look at those responsibilities for which we had a direct obligation to fulfill. And then we'd look at the particularly vulnerable in our society. of the direct responsibilities, you know right away probably that you're thinking of Glencliff, the New Hampshire Hospital, the Veterans Home, YDC. These are places where a patient, using the name a little loosely, I guess, for YDC, but a patient is under our care, and we provide the medical support, all the logistic support, the facilities, all of those things. And if we don't do it, nobody will do it. There's no one to step in to handle these responsibilities. So those have to be clear number ones, I think. And then, of course, we need to worry about the vulnerable. Now, as you heard the governor talk about her budget introduction, she led with the idea that we should be protecting our vulnerable populations. And while I don't disagree with her, it doesn't overcome the reality that we have people in our residential facilities that only we are responsible for. That has to come first. So when we looked at the developmentally disabled and the community health system, the DD community was taking almost, it was 19.9, but you could just say 20% of all the general funds. Given that we could only spend 75 cents on the dollar, it was inevitable that we had to take some kind of a look at the developmental disability spending. And when we did that, we worked hard, got some people who really understood the mechanics of the DD community, and we tried to reduce indirect costs and not the direct care of the DD wait list and the like. Did we succeed? I think your testimony will tell you whether we did or not. And then on the community health system, they had been funded previously at around 31 million. The request was to take it up to like 49 million. And so we returned the community health system back on the order of what they have experienced in their highest spend ever, which was 31 million. Again, is that adequate? Testimony will say, but you come back to the idea that we have unlimited wants and limited resources, and these healthcare costs are very difficult to make, and so we had to make some tough decisions. Shifting gears, if you all find money that we did not have to invest in this budget, the number one thing I would tell you to do, and please write this down or store it in your head, but the number one thing I think the state really needs to do to bolster our healthcare system is our budget, the House budget, includes a 3% Medicaid rate reduction. That is $57.5 million over the 2 years. And that sort of withdrawal of committed support at the existing rate levels, I think, will have a ripple effect. And although 3% doesn't sound like a great number, I think the impact of imposing it sort of late in every organization's budget cycles may cause some issues. And we already have capacity issues in the state. We know that. So a 3% Medicaid rate reduction, I think, could do more damage than we could foresee. So that's where I would recommend to your committee that you consider the first $57.5 million for the 2 years. If you get extra money, I'd put it there first. I don't mean to, ignore Division I or Division II, but as an advocate for our healthcare system, that's where I'm at. Then the other two big things that are floating around, that if there's additional funds to be invested, we had to impose a back of the budget cut on the order of $46 million. And they've handled back of the budget requests before, but never at this scale. So between, zero back of the budget and 46 million back of the budget, I think there's an opportunity to talk further with the commissioner of DHHS, who's been fantastic, by the way. It's been great working with Commissioner Weaver in this very difficult situation and her entire staff. But I would take a look at that back of the budget request just to see, you know, what may be the art of the doable there. The other one is I think we've got to continue to focus on protecting our rainy day fund, right? I mean, the rainy day fund is basically the financial credibility of our state and the bond ratings. And if you trigger a bond rating reevaluation to reduce it, again, that has unintended consequences that are more difficult to foresee. I would put three smaller things in there, but they're not inconsequential things. The first one that's I think is pretty significant is the Glencliff personnel and contracting governor's budget came in unusually low. In the past, they've been able to, you know, move some money around between the hiring money and the employee money and the contract money to keep the staffing up. But an analysis that one of the Division III people did, a pretty good analyst, and bounced it off the department, is that we were probably about $2 million short in the governor's budget in Glencliff personnel. So we made it a priority to get nearly $500,000 a year in there, more than what the governor did. And is that adequate? It's better than it was, but I don't know if it's adequate, really. Again, testimony. The other one, from a personal and contracting perspective, was the New Hampshire hospital. They don't have a lot of wiggle room in their personnel staffing, and so, as you know, Glencliff, we care for the mentally ill and the developmentally disabled, a patient with both diagnoses. So this is a very difficult population to work with. So Glencliff is kind of unique as one of the gems of our healthcare crown. And then the New Hampshire hospital, of course, has a critical role in maintaining a central location in our entire community mental health network. So I think it may another pair of eyes looking at the personnel issues at New Hampshire Hospital would be appropriate. Then I think late in the day that maybe a pretty good case was made for us to relook family planning at Coos County. Our family planning money, we eliminated it under the thought that we're taking care of people who cannot take care of themselves, that's the priority. And as important as the family planning services are, these are generally adults, maybe poor adults. That's what the testimony said. They have no money to help themselves, and we have to provide those services for free. At the end of the day, there was a judgment call there that at least these people are healthy and sentient and may be able to go find their own resources. And in the southern tier, there appears to be alternatives that they could find. The Coos County may be the exception to that, particularly when up in Vermont on the northern part of it, they just closed one of their family planning services. And so that Vermont institution had provided a lot of support to North Country citizens, but they're not going to be available for that any longer. So again, I would just look at Coos. We did something, and I'm not saying we shouldn't look at the developmentally disabled and community health funding, because I think we reduced it. I don't think we cut direct things, but these systems have been very responsive to their communities, and the community mental health money has been growing rapidly based on perception of the need. So I would look at those. But one of the things that we did that you'll probably need to relook, I think it's the right thing to do, and I'll tell you what it is we have the Governor's Commission on Alcohol and Other Drug Misuse, a commission that takes a look at other drugs and alcohol to create prevention, treatment, and recovery capabilities within the state to fund those. Meanwhile, we have an opioid abatement commission that also does prevention, treatment, recovery, also of the other drugs, the opioids, and doesn't have an alcohol take to it. So what I think is that these two organizations take up so much money and they're investing in such a similar area that there's a logical purpose for eliminating some redundancy to get so that we don't have two stovepipes running in parallel, that we have one kind of integrated team. So I think in the next budget or the next legislative session, we should take a serious look at consolidation there. To move in that direction, the liquor fund gets 5% or gives 5% to the Governor's Commission. We move that 5% over to general funds because we have so many general funds needs. We need the cash. And then we took opioid abatement money that was analyzed and assessed to be available to backfill what we were doing in the Governor's Commission. So we're moving money from the Governor's Commission to the general funds. We're taking opioid abate money to the Governor's Commission on the order of $10.7 million. And so some people have raised the question, is that legal to go into the opioid abatement fund? I've been asking the question, I guess a question went to the Senate attorney and then over to the AG, and that there was supposed to be some come to Jesus meeting last Wednesday on whether or not it was legal. I never heard a result of that. But I, being an amateur lawyer, I read some of the language, and I think as long as the settlement fund is being informed what we're doing, we're probably okay. So, but I'm not a lawyer. But I'm not alone, because the governor took some opioid abatement fund in her budget and moved it to Granite Hammer. So, so there has been some shifting of that money. Now, why would I do such a thing? I think if you're familiar with the Governor's Commission, they do great work, but they do it without legislative oversight, and we've given up our power of the purse. Because they get this 5% on an automatic basis, and that's taxpayer money, goes straight to the commission. They have great, smart people trying to figure out how to use it, but there's no legislative decision in the loop on that, and I think that's a weak constitutional principle. So, so I think we should regain in the next budget kind of an overview of the spending plan of the commission. So that's a big reason. And also I told you already about the redundancy. I think there's a natural consolidation there. How it might be done, I think, is subject to a lot of good discussion by a lot of stakeholders. But prevention, treatment, and recovery is prevention, treatment, and recovery. So we're trying to build the same kind of capacity in the community with two different funds that worry about such a thing. And I just think we could probably end up doing smarter things if we coordinated them. So that's my overview. I didn't refer to the document in front of you, the comparative statement of undesignated surplus in the following pages, because I going mechanically through this sheet, I thought would prevent you from having a real sense of what I think the issues are. Well, at the end of the day, what is the budget? It's limited resources, unlimited wants, and it's got to be prioritized, and those priorities need to match our social values. And we've done that in Division 3 and passed it through the Finance Committee in the House with a lot of support. So we didn't do it perfect, but we did it good enough to get it to y'all.
Questions from the senators? Senator Rosenwald.
I have lots of questions, but I'm not going to ask them today. But I share your concern about the Medicaid rate decreases. First of all, that money goes into net patient services revenues, which generates a 53 or so federal match. I mean, so I know that the House increased the Met revenue prediction for '26 while lowering net patient services revenues. Did you have discussions about whether you could still count on like the $375 million of federal money still?
I think you raised an excellent point. And I think even in a Division Three, we're a small group, right? I think there might have been some left hand not talking to the right hand involved there because we did the Met estimate adjustments independently relatively early on in the process because we needed to push revenues, right? And the 3% cut to the Medicaid came towards the back end of our process because it was math. How do you get from 1.1 billion to 810 million? They're just, it's such a large number that there really were not great alternatives. And so I think maybe one of the casualties of that firefight was that those two numbers probably aren't resolved synchronously.
Additional questions? Seeing none?
All right.
All right.
And I'll, because I didn't drive you through the spreadsheet, I'll say the good news is you'll be looking at this a lot. And Mr. Ripple is the author of it, and he knows more about it than I'll ever know about it. So working in your committee, I think you'll have everything you need to know because he's been excellent. The whole LBA staff has been excellent, and I'm not going away. If you all want to bring me in to talk about
We
any
certainly
item,
know your email address.
you know how to get hold of me.
And know how to get a hold of you.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
All right. Any questions on any of the divisions? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to move the briefing on the surplus statement to the back of this meeting if I can, if that doesn't create a problem. And we're going to take a comfort break for 5 minutes, and then we're going to come back. So we're in recess. All right, I'm going to say this loud so maybe somebody out there will hear. We're going to call the committee out of recess and start. Introduce yourselves and
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Paul Breen with the Peace Development Authority, Executive Director, and I'm joined with Suzanne Anzalone, our Finance Director at the Peace Development Authority. And very briefly, I'll remind the committee that Peace Development Authority took over administrative oversight of Division of Ports and Harbors approximately 2011. And ultimately, we're here to present the operating budget and explain any differences. I'll have Susie jump right into what we see different from between our FY24 actuals and what we're recognizing in the proposed FY27.
All right. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. So basically, there's a couple of line items that I noticed that you might have noticed yourselves bring to your attention is I'm looking at our budgeted overtime, which is a bit higher than probably what we need. And just also reminding this committee that all of our expenditures, none of these impact the general fund. They're all reimbursed. So as you're incurring the expenses, we are reimbursing you quarterly. So if this committee has any issues with the amount in the overtime budget for administration, we could definitely reduce that. Again, it's just reducing the revenue, so whatever your preference is. Other than that, and also the overtime in the harbor management department, that is higher than what we've incurred in the last year. So if the committee would like to reduce that, again, just reducing the amount that we're sending over to you. And you may also note under harbor management, we've got the retiree pension benefits where our actual expenditures were zero, but we've got authorized budget of 151 and 160,000. Those expenses are paid directly to the Department of Administrative Services. So I'm guessing that's why they don't show up as an expenditure on our budget directly, even though it's something that we do incur. So those are the big line items that I noticed. Are there any other
questions from the
variances
senators?
for us?
They seem happy.
Okay, Mike, well, thank you.
Okay, that was easy.
All right. Next on the list is the banking department. I guess I'm more familiar with your predecessor than you guys, so. Hey, it's all right. Ready when you are.
Okay. So I do have a handout that's going around. I'm not going to go through every piece of it, but it does give the highlights. Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Amelia Galdieri. I'm the bank commissioner for the state of New Hampshire. With me is Director of Operations, Christina Martin, for the banking department. Thank you for the opportunity to provide information about our budget proposal. So my plan is to kind of go through high level what the banking department does, what we see when we look out at the landscape that informed how we came up with our budget proposal. And then we are one of the agencies that has a dedicated fund that is on the list that I heard questions about earlier. So I can go into that a little bit at the end. So the banking department is a consumer protection focused regulatory agency that supervises a wide variety of financial service entities. We accomplish our mission by conducting examinations of licensed and chartered entities, investigating consumer complaints, bringing enforcement actions when necessary for violations of law, and providing financial education outreach to New Hampshire citizens. We are, for the purposes of our budget structure, we are organized into two divisions, the Banking and Trust Division, 2046 is the accounting unit, and the CCD Division, 2043. So effectively 2 buckets. That's how I refer to it throughout. We are a self-funded agency. That means we take no general funds. How that works is at the start of every fiscal year, we receive an appropriation for our budget. And then over the course of the year, we collect fines and fees to effectively pay back that appropriation. At the end of the year, to the extent there's a shortfall or a deficit between the amount we take in and the initial or the amount we've spent through the appropriation, we collect an assessment on our licensed and chartered entities. We do that in 2 different buckets. So for the chartered institutions, the banks, the credit unions, the trust companies, we almost always collect an assessment because there isn't a lot of fine activity on that side. For the consumer credit entities, so that's mortgage companies, money transmitters like PayPal or Venmo, debt adjusters, car dealerships that do financing, we almost never have an assessment on that side because we do collect enough fines and fees to fully recoup that appropriation or credit towards that appropriation. So when it comes to our budget proposal, the banking department is basically 89% salaries and benefits. We don't have a lot of other things in our budget. We have 53 positions. 1 position is vacant right now. It actually just recently became vacant. We've already identified the person who's going to fill it from inside our staff. Her position will then become vacant. We hope to have all of these machinations done by May 30th. At that point, we will be fully staffed with no vacant positions and no unfunded positions. So with that in mind, when we look out at the landscape, in New Hampshire, we continue to experience growth in the trust industry. Currently, actually as of Friday, we have 46, we used to have 45, non-depository trust companies chartered by the New Hampshire Banking Department with nearly $2 trillion in assets under administration. That makes New Hampshire the 3rd largest state for trust company supervision. Additionally, another thing you see when you look at the landscape is increased fintech supervision. So most of the time, how I think of that is large nationwide money transmitters with increasingly complex tech-driven business models. We license Venmo, PayPal, Apple Pay, just to name a few. So both of and trust companies additionally, there's all sorts of creative uses for those charters. We have a wide variety of those companies. So when we send our folks into the field, we have to be able to recruit and retain experienced professional staff who can go out into the field and understand what these companies do and effectively regulate them. So that's part of what we thought about when we put together our budget proposal. Another component is our exam schedule. There was a legislative change last year that's going to, that is causing the banking department to do approximately 300 more examinations over the course of the next 2 years because we formalized an exam schedule for auto dealers who take finance applications, because we did that. We worked with the Auto Dealers Association to make that happen, to address some consumer concerns that we had seen cropping up in consumer complaints and really try to get out ahead of that. So that is causing us to have an increased number of examinations that we're going to conduct. So the meat and potatoes of our budget proposal, we were directed to flat fund our budget to fiscal year 25, but we were permitted to increase travel and training lines to account for all the things I just mentioned. So travel at the banking department, we send our examiners into the field, as I mentioned. When they go into the fields, that cost of travel is fully paid by the entity who we are examining. So we basically send them a bill for that and they pay it. So that amount is fully reimbursed. Before the pandemic, we traveled to every exam. During the pandemic, we traveled to no exams. Now we're kind of finding the right answer. I think it's somewhere in the middle of those two extremes. We want to be efficient and effective regulators, but we don't want to unduly burden the entities under our jurisdiction. So it's basically turning into a mixture of on-site work and then off-site work. Another thing that's coming up with regard to travel is entities increasingly are requesting that we send our staff on-site for some portion of the exam. Particularly these large tech-driven ones want our examiners to come on-site to them and are fully willing to pay for that expense. It's the most common request I get, and with our budget, because over time during the pandemic, we cut travel to kind of make up for any changes that we need to make during the pandemic. But now I'm having to say no to entities that want our people to come on site, and they're like, we don't understand why, we'll pay for it. So that's kind of the conversations that I'm having. That's why we were permitted to increase our travel line. With regard to training, to complete the mission of the department and meet the growing demands of supervising these large, complex financial institutions, we need to increase our training. A lot of it, I think, are probably, I almost don't want to say this out loud, but I feel like we're one of the agencies that has to deal with cryptocurrency the most. We feel a lot of questions about that. We have to go out and we examine people for cybersecurity and IT. So we have to have people who are fully up to speed and can go to those large, go to Google Payments and understand what Google Payments is doing. So training is really, really important to us and to accomplishing our mission. In terms of the flat funding, so we increased those two lines. But for the flat funding, we sought internal efficiencies first. So we reduced our office square footage by going paperless. That was a process, but we've now completed it. So we have a paper-free office. And that allowed us to reduce our square footage in our office. We also converted administrative positions into examiner positions because when we send our examiners into the field, we bill for their time. So that allows us to recoup that expense more effectively. Like, for example, the commissioner used to have an administrative assistant. I don't have an administrative assistant anymore. I can do my own scheduling. So those are some of the choices that we've made over time. Another thing we did is we reviewed external costs. So we we had a position that we were fully funding at the Department of Justice that did about 10 hours of work for us. So we decided we did not need that position anymore. So we worked with the Department of Justice to defund that position. Additionally, we have a modernization project going on right now with our data to move our data out of Access databases and into a more modern SharePoint system. And it actually went, I think, fully live on April 1st. So far, so good. But we did that with all internal resources. So that enabled us to defund one of our DOIT positions. So those are the ways we sort of achieve flat funding, but keeping our staff intact at the banking department. So that's kind of the meat and potatoes of our budget. I was going to talk about the dedicated fund amendment, if that is good, or I'm happy to answer any questions.
Let's see if they have any questions on
Sure.
the first part. Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. Just one question. In addition to the 46 non-depository trust companies, how many family trusts?
Of those 46, 5 are family trust companies.
Oh, okay, so
That
it's
includes,
not an
it includes
addition.
that number. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
I guess I have a question for LBA. Is there a better way of looking at their revenues, especially if a company is willing to completely reimburse for travel, putting in a revenue account into that? Because again, if we're not using any general funds and we're using, fees and things, is there a better way than what we're doing it right now to reflect that in the budget? It's not a question for today, it's a
Okay.
question for
We will have
ongoing.
that available for you.
All right.
I think that the banking department, I think there's other agencies that all do it a little differently based on the statutes, so it would be a question we'd have to look at. We've been doing it the way we do it for as long as I've been involved, so yeah.
My point is that if it's for the efficiency of your agency,
Yes.
If there's a better way, then we ought to go look at it. That's all.
Absolutely. Yep.
All right, moving on to dedicated funds, I guess.
Okay. So real quick, there was an amendment in the House. It was in, I think you all are aware of it, so I won't go into it, but it creates the 5% administrative charge per fiscal year on revenue deposited into certain dedicated funds. So the banking department has one fund that is on the list of funds affected by that. It's the Consumer Credit Administration License Fund. So recall that we have effectively 2 accounting units at the department. So that fund only affects the CCD division, 2043, rhymes with CCD. That's how I remember it. So how that division works, again, we get our appropriation, we then do our supervision activity, we collect fines, fees, et cetera. One of those fees that we collect is a per diem fee, the charge for our exam staff to go in and examine these entities. We set that fee every year based on the salaries of our people and how much they actually cost. So every year we slightly adjust that fee to stay as up to date as possible. And so if we collect more fines, for example, if we have a big enforcement action, and then at the end of the year, we take our fees that we've collected, that fine, and we credit it against our appropriation, say we have then some money left over, a surplus, because we did a big fine, that surplus is what goes into that dedicated fund for us, okay? So I believe, and this is something that we're still trying to work out with DAS, is understanding how they would plan to administer this. I think it's kind of all happening live, so we're waiting on some information on that. But if you look at our dedicated fund report, we have to do a dedicated fund report that reflects 5 years. You can see the kind of money that's flowing in and out of this fund. Every year that I've been the bank commissioner, I have basically taken when we have a surplus sitting there and tried to lower the per diem so that basically those fines that we charge against bad actors work to lower the cost of regulation against everyone under our jurisdiction. So essentially I take that amount and I lower the per diem using it on the consumer credit entities. So the small mom and pop car dealerships, the sole proprietor mortgage company who works out of the basement of their house, those folks. Additionally, all the big entities that are licensed on CCD. But those are really the ones who are in New Hampshire who the per diem affects on a routine basis. Okay, so, sorry, I want to make sure I'm really clear about this because I've been trying to figure it out for like the last 5 days. So a 5% charge on the revenue coming in, number one, if you look at our dedicated funds report, last year there was, what I believe to be no revenue coming into that fund. There was money sitting there that we used to reduce the per diem, but because we reduced the per diem, it caused us to not put any extra, there was no surplus to go in there. So last year, if there was a 5% charge, you would get $0. The year before that, there was a tiny little surplus that went in. And so a 5% charge on that would have been $13,000. So over the course of 5 years, looking back, assuming that DAS calculates this the same way I'm suggesting, over the course of 5 years, you would have only recouped $160,000. And so it's not very much money that this fee would be generating. And then I would caution that eventually over time, it will diminish my ability to reduce costs for the entities under my jurisdiction, because that's what I do with that money. But it's a policy decision for all of you, but I just wanted to let you know that that's how I believe it will work, but we are working with DAS right now as we speak to try to make sure that my interpretation would be the same as their interpretation.
Okay, you can provide the details of what you think would have gone in to LBA, and they can provide that as they do the analysis.
Will do.
All right, questions? Senator Lang.
So just real quick, the dedicated fund component is what I want to focus in on. So again, the agencies you regulate or the businesses you regulate are the ones that give you your per diems and your reimbursements and anything that's in surplus to you, but into this dedicated fund. Is that correct?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yep. And then,
Yep.
and then from that, you again use those surpluses that were paid to then reduce the regulatory costs for everybody else you regulate.
Correct.
When
That's
there
my
are funds
goal.
available.
Yeah, if we can, to the best, it's a little bit of a prediction game, because some years we will have a big enforcement action, so we'll get a big fine, and then we'll go a couple years where we don't have a lot of activity, because people are hopefully behaving and operating well and protecting consumers, so we don't have a lot of fines. So it's a little bit of a guessing game, but you can see that last year I accomplished my goal of eating into that fund a little bit, because we reduced the per diem, we ate into the fund. So that meant that money was effectively given back to the people under my regulation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, additional questions? Additional comments? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now, employment security. Oh, labor first. Excuse me, we don't want to miss Commissioner Merrifield.
Ken's like, I'll leave, I'm good.
Well, you may want to have a couple things to talk to us about. It was the bifocals, These are actually transitions.
Oh, yours. I thought you were talking about his.
No, mine. What do they say? I'm blind in one eye and can't see out of the other.
That's what I tell my husband.
Good afternoon, Senator Gray, senators. Thank you for this opportunity to talk to you about our budget. I am Ken Merrifield, Commissioner of the Department of Labor. I'm joined by Danielle Albert, the Deputy Commissioner, and also behind us is Amy O'Hara, who is our Director of Administration. And I'll offer you a choice in the interest of time, Senator Gray. I could talk about our operations, or I could just jump right into the financial pieces.
I think the financial piece, but, okay.
Excellent.
I didn't get any, no, I want the other, so.
But House Division 1 felt quite the same way, so not surprising. While the Department of Labor's total appropriations are funded 100% by agency income, that income comes from two distinct sources, the first being the administration fund and the second being the restricted fund. And the administration fund is described in RSA 281A59, and it comes from a pro rata assessment based on the budget that the legislature approves. We assess all of the workers' comp insurance carriers in the state on a pro rata basis based on their claims paid in the prior year. And that actually is the lion's share of our budget. It represents about 87% of our fiscal 26 ask. The restricted fund, on the other hand, is the sum of all other revenues that we collect at the Labor Department. So any penalties, any certificates, licenses, any other fees or revenue of any type is deposited in the restricted fund. And then throughout the year, we pay our expenses associated with the restricted fund from that money, but the balance at the end of the year is transferred back to the general fund. So historically, the department has returned between $1 million and $1.5 million to the general fund at the end of the year, but I can report to you happily that the last 4 years have been our best years ever in terms of general fund contribution. We've exceeded $2 million in each of the last 4 years, and in fact, 2 of those years we exceeded $3 million. With regard to the expenditure budget that we're asking for, Governor Sununu's office provided an overall efficiency target of just over $12 million, which was level funded with prior adjusted authorized. The adjusted year 2 target was $12.4 million after allowances for position cost increases. The Labor Department met both targets with our agency budget request, and Governor Ayotte made only very modest changes to that budget, about $20,000, I think, which were related to prioritized needs that other agencies were asking for as transfers. And so those were eliminated. But apart from that, Governor Ayotte approved our budget pretty much as is, as did the House. They approved our budget with no changes at all. We requested no new positions for 26 or 27. That leaves us with 87 full-time authorized positions. I should mention too, although we abolished 8 positions in the prior biennium, we did add one back because the Senate added a program to our department in House Bill 2, in the last version of House Bill 2. So that leaves us with 87 full-time positions. In order to achieve efficiency targets, though, we did freeze funding for 3 positions in the coming operating budget. Notable changes that you'll see in our efficiency request include a slight increase in Class 17 special payments, which we use to fund retirement payouts for retiring employees or terminating employees. There were significant reductions in our transfers to both DOIT and to general services. We have an increase in equipment in year 1 of the budget because we want to buy a more suitable vehicle for our elevator inspectors. They, as you might imagine, when we're testing elevators for acceptance, they have to carry around testing weights with them, and all the rest of our vehicles are these little energy efficient subcompacts, and they're not really suitable for carrying around the elevator weights. And then we have to bring them in and out of the building after use. So it's highly inefficient, and so we want to buy a vehicle to obviate that problem. And then the other large increase we had is to cover indirect costs. Our costs related to the statewide cost allocation plan have increased quite a bit. Our share of the statewide cost allocation plan have increased quite a bit. In fact, this year we're going to be coming back to fiscal soon to ask for another $100,000 so that we can pay Commissioner Arlinghouse. So those costs have been increasing. We significantly reduced the budget for part-time temporary staff, but increased the budget for some of our administratively attached boards, which include both per diem payments to those board members and their travel expenses. We also asked for an increase in year 1 for our Class 103 operational contracts line for needs associated at the Spalding building. And that really concludes the highlights from our increases and decreases, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Questions from the senators? Senator Bertzel.
Thank you, and thank you for taking my question. So I noticed there's almost $100,000 difference between the adjusted for 2025 to in line 10, personal services, permanent class. Is that for increase? Because you said you're not hiring it. There's a hiring freeze.
Right.
So it shows here that you went from $824,892 to $937,446. And then again, increases in fiscal year 2027 to $965.
Mm-hmm. And I'd speculate, do you know him?
Come on up to one of the microphones if you would. There's a chair right there. Right there. Just push the red button and pull the mic down. You can sit down. It'll pick you up.
The first part of the increase is for the healthcare position, so we had to absorb that into our budget. And then
Okay.
the rest of
So
it,
the new position that the Senate added was
Okay.
not funded as part of the level funding.
Okay.
and then the second is vacancies. In this budget, all vacancies are funded, whether they remain vacant or not.
Okay. Thank you.
Additional questions? Senator Pearl.
Good afternoon. How are
Good
you
afternoon,
today?
how are you?
I want to switch to an HB2 question if I can.
Yes, of course.
So it was brought to my attention that in section 141 HB2, dealing with our favorite topic of second injuries from the special fund. It looks like, or it appears that the appeal process on the workers' compensation decisions gives an opportunity to appeal the results of a hearing in the Compensation Appeals Board. Under Section 141, the appeal of the Compensation Appeals Board is eliminated, basically giving parties the only option of an appeal to the New Hampshire Supreme Court. I mean, generally speaking, the Supreme Court doesn't take a lot of these cases up, so I guess I'm curious why that change has occurred.
It actually does not. If you read the statute in totality, what is happening now as the result of a recent Supreme Court decision is that insurance carriers are able to ask for 2 hearings at the Department of Labor.
Okay.
And the burden on the Attorney General's office is substantial. And the way that this has been practiced in the past, we've offered 1. The language that we're offering here reverts to that. So there will be a hearing offered at the first level, the department level, as opposed to going to both the department and the Compensation Appeals Board.
Paula?
Absolutely.
So at the appeal process at the department level, do they have the opportunity to prepare for this with information? Do they know what the whole process is, or?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
They will have received a denial from the department on their claim for the second injury fund, explaining what's missing from the claim.
All right,
And
so
then-
they'll have all the information in order to come in and have a proper hearing.
Without question. I mean, this sort of returns us to 18 months ago, 2 years ago, what the department was practicing with regard to these disputes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Additional questions?
Oh, I would just add to.
Additional comments.
I'm sorry. The Supreme Court in its decision that put us in this place said there may be a legislative remedy.
And
So-
this is it.
So,
Thank you.
All right, unless you have more, you're good to go.
okay, thank you so much.
And we will get employment security up here this time. If there's 3 of you, one can sit over there. You have to hit the button. Gotta have a red light.
How's that, better?
That's much better.
For the record, George Kapanis, Commissioner of Employment Security, Deputy Commissioner Rich Labors, and Business Administrator Joe Revels. So we've just got something, a brief rundown we thought we'd give you, and then take any questions you might have. So as you know, we don't have any general funds, the majority of our non-match federal funds. We've also got supplemental 0.2% set aside of employer-paid unemployment taxes to fill gaps in the program. Without those funds, the state wouldn't be able to operate 6 of the 12 New Hampshire Works offices. Also, from the $6 million annually goes to job training. We've administered that program since 2019. The Work Invest program, which is a 50% reimbursement to New Hampshire employers for costs to deliver training for upgrading skills. Since 2019, 6.8 million or 405 Work Invest grants to employers to deliver training to workers. The Work Now program, which is one-on-one job readiness for those enrolled in Medicaid, SNAP, and TANF. And since 2019, 6.2 million for Work Now to prepare and secure employment. The Work Ready program, which is through the community colleges for job readiness and professional skill enhancement. Since 2019, we've spent 3.6 million for Work Ready. Our initial claims this past week were 372, and continued claims 3,806. And just to give you a sense as to how that compares to 2020 during the pandemic, During the pandemic, on the week of 4/11/20, we had 39,585 initial claims and 51,000 continued claims, with continued claims peaking at 112,204 on May 6th of 2020. During the pandemic, we paid out over $2 billion to over 175,000 grant state workers, which was more money paid out, more people served than in the past decade combined. The total number of full-time staff we have now is 282, with 22 in active recruitment and 27 vacant temporary positions. The vacant positions allow us to ramp up during an economic downturn. Vacant positions are included in HB 1 as introduced by Governor Ayotte and carried forward from the House. Just so you know, so during the pandemic, Friday, everything was fine. Monday, everything collapsed, so we had no time at all to ramp up. Basically, all the current staff that were working in 2020 and March 17th of 2020 worked 7 days a week, overtime, up through the end of August in order to try to process everything that was coming into the office. So 61% of our budget's personnel-related costs. DOIT is 12%. The Job Training Fund is 10%. Software equipment and equipment-related is 10%. General operating expenses is 7%. The Job Training Program was proposed to be eliminated by the House Division 1, but they reversed course and maintained as part of the New Hampshire Employment Security budget, and we urge the Senate to maintain the program. We think the previous numbers reflect the value of the program. NHES, in partnership with BEA and the community colleges, hosts the most job fairs in the state. Last year, we held 65 job fairs throughout the state, a lot of which are virtual, some are in person as well. During the pandemic, we did all the job fairs were virtual, and we've flipped to doing a significant number now in person as well. We also provide a job portal for use by employers and job seekers as well. We hold small recruitment events in our offices for the employers. The Unemployment Trust Fund, which pays out all the unemployment benefits to those that are receiving benefits. The fund's been hovering at or around $390 million, which is close to $100 million more than prior to the pandemic. Employers currently receive a 1% discount on their taxes when the fund stays at or above $350 million for every day of a full quarter, which it has stayed and continues to stay at that level. Some of the reasons why: low claim volume, 18% growth, nearly 8,500 registered employment establishments since the pandemic, 4% private sector growth, which is another 23,000 jobs since before the pandemic. Also, the trust fund received $109 million in pandemic funds. New Hampshire is the lowest unemployment tax burden in the Northeast, and it's the fourth lowest nationally, as low as it's been in 30 years, less than 1/3 of the amount paid by mass employers. We also partner with Administrative Services and the Insurance Department of the state's voluntary paid family leave program, which currently provides coverage for 24,000 people. Coverage is available to all New Hampshire employers and New Hampshire workers. The House maintained the program, but they eliminated the budget for marketing. We look forward to continuing to provide essential services for the businesses and the job seekers and those seeking unemployment benefits in the state. And with that, I'll close.
Questions from senators? Senator Rosenbaum?
Two questions. if I
I'll
could.
let you do them both.
Thanks. On page 653, there's one line, grants non-federal, really jumps. And contracts for program services get zeroed out between 24 and 25 and going forward. I'm just curious why the big changes in those two lines.
Thank you. So we were using Class 102 for all of the job training program payments as well as the dislocated worker program payments until the budget office instructed we had to change and start using Class 72 and 73 for state and federal grants. So you'll see the transition
from what was 102 into class 72 and 73.
Okay. And my second question, if I
Yes, ma'am.
could. When is the contract with MetLife for paid family leave up? And there's a reason I'm asking.
Yeah, Senator, I'll get you a copy of the contract. The original term was 5 years with an option for 2. I believe it goes to the end of 27, with an option for a 2-year extension.
So the end of fiscal 27.
That would, I believe so, but I'll get you a copy of that.
Okay.
Well, I'll give you the summary so you don't have to go through the whole thing.
Since the way you worded it, does the contract go to 25 plus the 2-year extension to 27 and a possibility of going, it goes all the way to 27 with the 5 years and then a possibility of going to 29?
Exactly, Mr.
Okay, I
Chairman.
just wanted to make sure it was clear. Yes,
So
ma'am.
would the department consider when the contract expires in 27, amending the RFP so that the bidding has to include outreach to the individual market?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point you bring up. It wasn't part of the original RFP because the statute as it existed and still exists requires the state to do that marketing.
Mm-hmm.
So if that continues to be the case, that the state is no longer going to do the marketing, then that could be something we look to address in the RFP when we're looking for a new vendor.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Additional comments? No? All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members.
Thank you
Thanks
now.
so much.
And insurance. I don't have that many microphones.
Senator Gray has sent me to brevity school, and I have yet to flunk out yet, but I'm still a work in progress, so we'll see how I do today. So good afternoon, everyone. DJ Betancourt, I have the pleasure of serving as the Commissioner of the New Hampshire Insurance Department. I'm joined here at the table by Jason Dexter, who is our Assistant Commissioner. Also joining us is Keith Nyan, our Deputy Commissioner, and Ted Perkins, our Business Unit Director. So we are obviously the insurance department. We are a self-funded agency with 89 employees. We've given you a brief presentation here that provides you with a little bit of a department overview, where the relevant statutes for the work that our department does resides. We've obviously tried to be attentive to the information that you specifically asked for. I would note that our department is funded through an annual administrative assessment. That assessment is done by, goes out to each company based on the per capita written premium that they write in the state of New Hampshire. Our tax unit is the entity within the department that is responsible for calculating and sending out the invoices of that administrative assessment fee. It's collected on an annual basis, and again, that is what comprises the department's operating budget. I will go to what I believe is page 4, which I think is most attentive to the specific information that you asked for. So in terms of the department's budget for fiscal year 2024, our actual was $12,411,233.
That's the page that says state finance focus?
That's correct. Yep. Fiscal year 2025, adjusted authorized is $15,343,677. Jason, you had a little bit of extra information in terms of what the House did on those numbers?
Yeah, so that 15,343 number obviously jumped up for benefits and salary. And in that budget, we had requested for a 7D to go to our consumer unit. And to get to our number below, we unfunded 3 positions. They requested the 7D. my understanding is the difference between the number that we requested and what the House gave us is less that 7D, which was not approved. So it should be roughly that number.
Wonderful. Yeah, just wanted to make sure that we included that nuance as well. So as we look at fiscal year 26 and 27, operating budget as passed by the House, we've got for fiscal year 2026, $15,342,855, and for fiscal year 2027, $15,661,431. I would note that these numbers are better than the 4% reduction in discretionary spending that the governor had given to all state agencies back in the late summer, early fall. We did that through a number of different ways. In the first instance, we unfunded 3 positions. We trimmed back on our travel and training budget, which we felt was appropriate given the fact that we are now a couple of years into some succession planning. And so we've got some of those key positions filled at this point, and those people have gotten training already. They're in the position. They're learning day by day. And then we've also cut back on our consultants, which again is reflected by the fact that we've got people who are getting more and more experience by the day in their positions so that we don't have to rely quite so heavily on those consultants. The other thing that I would note that our budget does is that it improves the accuracy of the Class 50 budget to support, again, that continued reasonable succession planning. For those of you who have been on this committee for a time, there are at least 3 insurance commissioners that I'm aware of in a row who have come before legislative committees and talked about the fact that the department is on the older side of things across state government, and that some retirements were coming, and that it was really important to have some succession planning in place, and we've done that. And so, as I said, we're making good progress. We're not all the way there yet, but it has resulted in us being able to make some adjustments in our budget, which you see reflected here. I'll skip over the next slide in the sense that you can take a look at that. It gives you an overview of what the department does as it pertains to what you might be interested in. And I think at this point, I'll skip right to a couple of highlights as it regards House Bill 2. So the department did put in 3 total requests for House Bill 2. They were all removed during the governor's part of the budget. The only thing that I think as Jason just mentioned, that we would ask you to consider is potentially allowing us to add 1 position into our consumer unit. Over the past 3 years, we have dedicated a lot of time and resources and attention to our department's outreach to let consumers know the fact that we exist and what we can do to assist them and advocate on their behalf. And we are starting to see that work pay off. We are seeing increases in terms of calls into our consumer division. I would note that in terms of how we define consumer, we take a pretty broad definition of that. And so we'll take calls in from healthcare providers, from body shops, from all sorts of different entities. And we treat those with the same care and attention that we would any citizen walking down the street who happens to give us a call because they're uncertain about some aspect of their insurance coverage or they've got an issue with their insurance company. We are starting to see notable increases in the inbound calls into the department, which is great. It means that, again, that outreach work is paying off. More and more people are coming to us for assistance. And so in order for us to be able to maintain the turnaround times that we are very proud to be able to have in place at the current time, we could use some additional help. But again, that's for your consideration. I would note 2 things for, again, your consideration under the headline of some concern. The first is that the House included in their budget a 5% administration fee on the assessment that the department issues to insurance carriers, again, to fund the department. We've heard a lot of pushback from industry on that. I'm sure that you'll hear from them as well in terms of those additional cost burdens that they'll have to bear. In terms of the regulatory perspective, I would note that you've got to take into account the fact that we have retaliatory tax laws on our books. And so if this should happen to go forward, there are implications for that. Jason, could you just give them a very brief rundown of that retaliatory tax dynamic?
Yeah, so to speak to that, despite what's in our statute of the certain premium being taxed at 1.25% and some at 2%, we have a retaliatory tax, which means that if another state is charging our domestics a higher rate, we apply that rate to them as well. So when you think of all the carriers that we're charging, not all of them are paying 2, many are paying higher. So it isn't as simple as us, say, adding a quarter percentage on one of those numbers and thinking you're going to get 25% more. It would be some percent more depending on how it played out.
So while that sometimes causes a bit of a complication for measures that, as I said, the House took in their 5% administration fee, I would note that in many instances that cuts to our benefit as states that make different decisions than New Hampshire does. Not going to mention any names, but California, New York, Massachusetts, and New Jersey, as they increase their taxes on insurance carriers, again, that redounds to our benefit in the sense that they're then levied retaliatory tax by our department, which generates additional revenue. But like I said, you've got to account for the fact that that can cut the other way too as you look at that particular provision of what is contained in the House budget. The other thing that I would note that is getting a lot of industry pushback, they're contacting me and making me aware of it, is the increase in the motor vehicle records fee. So anytime an insurance carrier looks up an individual's motor vehicle record, as you might imagine, they'll do that when they're attempting to quote a consumer on their premium or when the consumer's up for renewal for their policy. There's a fee to look that up. My understanding is the House increased that fee either $2 or $3. I'm not quite sure, but that has obviously gotten some attention from industry. They have expressed their concern. From my perspective, I don't want to interfere with anything that the Department of Safety might be working on that would have necessitated that fee increase, but I'm just flagging it for you because, again, that is something that I've been hearing, and I wanted to give you a heads up about it. The last thing I'll mention is I know this committee is focused on the dollars and cents and not necessarily the Ways and Means part of that. Senator Lang, I know, is taking lead on that. I did send a letter to Senator Lang and a number of others in both the House and the Senate earlier today that we are revising our insurance premium tax revenue estimates upward. So in terms of where the numbers stand from what we originally proposed, they'll be up $13 million cumulatively over the biennium, $11 million up from what the House proposed or what the House adopted in their budget as well. I've outlined, thank goodness this was not my final exam at brevity school that Senator Gray sent me to, but I did want you to have a full understanding of what the IPT is, what drives it, and why this particular hard insurance market is not playing itself out as it pertains to insurance premium tax revenue the way previous hard markets have. So all of that is spelled out there, but needless to say, I'm happy to answer any questions you have about that. And also simply to note that there are a number of factors that are outside of our control here at the state level that could impact those revenues. Things like whether or not the federal government continues the enhanced premium tax credits in our individual health insurance market, what the full impact of any imposed or permanently imposed tariffs might be, interest rates, things of that nature. So I'm giving you the best analysis of the market, again, based on current experience, but also needing to note the fact that there is a great deal of uncertainty regarding some things that are just not in our control. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will stop.
We'll see if the senators are not figuring out where to spend that $11 million and have room for questions.
I have two questions, if I could. If the administration in Washington removes the extra subsidies from the health benefit exchange plans, would you still increase your insurance premium tax revenues?
Yes, because again, while I think our initial revenue estimates were quite conservative, I've not shot for the stars either. These are moderately conservative estimates. As I mentioned in the letter, I am very confident that we will not only meet those numbers, but we will potentially modestly exceed them. As a legislator in long-term recovery myself, I sat on the Ways and Means Committee when I was in the House, and the conversations always went a lot better when you came in and told the committee that you had in fact overshot your numbers and had more resources for them to work with, rather than coming in and saying, oops, we fell a little bit short. You're going to have to go find the makeup for that delta out of somebody's hide elsewhere within state government. So I'm very comfortable with those numbers, again, that we'll meet them, potentially exceed them, but there is some buffer built into them for those things that, again, we just cannot control here at the state level.
Thank you. And a separate question.
Yes, ma'am.
I know you certify the continuing care retirement communities, I think they're called. I think there are quite a number of them in New Hampshire. I'm curious, do you charge a fee for that certification? And if so, what is it?
So unless I'm mistaken, we do not levy our administrative assessment onto CCRCs. We do that oversight work absent that fee, but I think Jason has some further detail.
There's some small fees that are applicable to CCRCs for when they originally apply, when they do annual updates, but the annual assessment, premium assessment, isn't applied to them because there's no premium. It's kind of a unique arrangement.
But there are some fees.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you.
Senator Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just extend the same offer I did to all the other commissioners. If you feel like you want to waive off coming to Ways and Means, you're welcome to notify Sonia, given your letter. Unless you want to come in and explain it to the commission, to the committee, you're welcome to let Sonia know and waive the.
I always
appearance.
love to see you, Senator Lang, and members of your committee, but in the interest of time, and I know you all are busy, if my letter satisfies your curiosity, then we're good.
Unless Senator Rosenwald says otherwise, the answer is you don't have to show up.
All right, fair enough. I'll wait to hear from her.
Fantastic.
Additional questions? Seeing none?
Thank you all very much. We continue to be at your service. Whatever you need, just let us know. Thank you.
Thank you. And back to the surplus statement. And thank you very much for your indulgence to get me back close to schedule time for everybody else.
Absolutely, thank you. Just for the record, my name is Michael Kane, the Legislative Budget Assistant. The chairs this morning did a pretty good job going over the detail of the surplus statement, so I'll keep it very high level and just ask me any questions you have.
Excellent.
And I'll also be here down in 101 if you guys have any questions anytime during the week. So basically, for 25, if we look at the general fund surplus statement, as stated, the governor had assumed an $81 million draw from the rainy day fund. The result of that is because revenues were below what was anticipated, on top of appropriations outside of the budget process, and a lapse estimate shortfall of about $47.7 million. But I'll touch base with that one on 1 minute. So the governor, okay, so I'll give you 1 second until, it should be in the front of, yes, somewhere. We have a lot of extras, so. It's right on the left there, yeah. So as far as the general fund for the year we're currently in, the governor had proposed a budget assuming about an $81 million draw on the rainy day fund. Current rainy day fund balance is $292.5 through the end of the fiscal year 24. So the governor's proposed estimate 25 being an estimate of what was the year supposed to end, is about 211.5 million from the governor's perspective. The House's estimates for 25 are based on the Ways and Means Committee revenue estimates, which were close to $70 million, over $70 million short from where the governor was on the general fund. In addition, the House were looking at other appropriations fiscal had approved of about $6 million between, actually more than that, probably closer to $7 million between the YDC settlement fund of $5 million and a couple $1 million of judicial council requests that came in after the governor's budget. So the appropriations are going to continue to grow as we go through the Senate process. These are off-budget appropriation for things like judicial council, justice litigation, which may not come back in, any settlements that are entered into by justice, any workers' comp claims. These are all things that happen outside of the typical budget process, but we'll update that as we go through. What the Senate controls is really your revenue estimates for 25. You're going to be looking at your revenue estimates coming in, how they came in March, how they're going to come in April, and the Ways and Means Committee will come up with an estimate of where you think the general funds will end. That's really going to drive your 25 and how you think that will end. As Representative McGuire stated, the House had a decision to make whether or not to draw on the rainy day fund or whether or not to carry negative balance forward into the upcoming budget of 26-27. So that's the $770 million that Representative McGuire had mentioned today, includes any shortfall from 25, includes 26-27, and that was based on an analysis of the House revenue estimate versus what the governor had proposed. Obviously, the House, they came in with reductions in 26 to 27 as close as they could get to alleviate any deep draws on the rainy day fund. But in the end, in 25, they made the decision, instead of going deeper in 26 and 27 to cuts to try to make for any shortfall in 25, they made the decision to tap the rainy day fund in 25. So based on their information on the revenues, based on the appropriations, and based on lapse estimates, the House assumed a draw on the rainy day fund of 148.8 million, roughly, which would bring the rainy day fund balance down to 143.7. So that was one of the decisions they knew they had to make. So as they entered into, they being the House, entered into 26 and 27, they wanted to ensure that they put as much money they could back into the rainy day fund by the end of 26, 27. They couldn't get all the way to the money, to the 148.8 that they had assumed, but coming out of House Finance Committee, they actually had about 113 million going into the rainy day fund. Last Thursday on the floor, there were additional House appropriations that passed into the tune of about $32 million between the travel and tourism increase of about 14 million, almost $2.2 million on the welcome centers that were restored, and a change to the Keno local option and lottery that actually results in an additional draw from the Education Trust Fund. So in the end, the House plan put it estimates an additional 85 million going into the rainy day fund, so coming in at about $228.7 million, which is about $7.5 million over where the governor had come in. If I just go through 26, 27, we know that the revenues for the general fund, one of the ways that the House made up for the revenue shortfall in the general fund was to change the splits between the for the business taxes, real estate transfer, and tobacco. So you can see positive adjustments in the general fund of about $190 million, bring their total revenues of about 1.9, and then offset that against appropriations on line 9 of about $1.944 billion. Schedule 2 adjustments for 26, $13.3 million positive, and that's because of back of the budget reductions that were included in House Bill 1. In total, back of the budget reductions that the House proposed was probably about $80 million over the biennium, largest one being the $46 million for HHS. Lapse estimate came down a little bit, same percentage, but because the dollars appropriated were less, their lapse estimate in the House came down to 38.6. So in total, looking at the projected revenues, the assumed revenue changes in the general fund, and the assumed appropriation levels, the current year balance for 26 still had a positive balance of about $13.8 million roughly. Nothing lapses to the rainy day fund or is transferred to the rainy day fund in even numbered years. It carries forward into the following year. So you can see on row 1 on the far right side, the 13.8 million coming forward. Another 1.7 billion dollars in revenues. You can see that's almost 120 million dollars below what the governor had estimated. Revenue adjustments were higher, probably about by 70 million from where the governor was. And again, that's from the splits. The governor had recommended a 66-34 split between the general fund and education trust fund. The House had changed that to 70-30. Budget appropriations, the House Bill 1 appropriations on row 9 is about $1.97 billion in 27, offset by Schedule 2 adjustments of about $55 million, which includes Medicaid rate decreases, any back of the budget decreases, as well as a delay in payments for the MCOs in the last month of 27. So a positive $55 million adjustment to the appropriations. Lapse estimates you can see decreased on 11 from the 62.2 that the governor had to 57.7, and that's just mathematics. The House wanted to maintain the 3% estimate on lapses to end with the total appropriations about 1.867. For the current year balance, difference between estimated revenues for 27 and estimated appropriations resulted in a positive 97.9 million, including the 13.8 that came forward from 26, and the proposal resulted in a cumulative ending general fund balance of 111.7 million. On row 19, and I'll touch base with it on that in a second, but row 19 is a required transfer from the Education Trust Fund. As you previously discussed today, any shortfall in the Education Trust Fund is made up from a transfer from the general fund. In years past, there was no need, over the last few years, no need for a transfer from the general fund. The reason that the House is requiring a transfer from the general fund is because of that split, the change in the splits to the revenues, by moving that revenue over to the general fund. And you heard the chairs talk today about they felt a need in the general fund that needed to be met. They felt that they met all the needs in the Education Trust Fund or where they wanted to be on their budget. And so with the splits, they're able to fund that and accumulate enough of a surplus in 27 to transfer some back to the Education Trust Fund, as well as still transfer $85 million into the rainy day fund, bringing the balance to 228. Overall, what you're seeing is pretty flat revenues, even with all the adjustments. If you look at where the House came in, total revenues, the governor had about 1.895, the House at 181, barely $100 million growth in 26 in revenues, even with all those adjustments. And so as a result, as you look at the total appropriations on row 13, in 25, you're close to $2.04 billion in general fund appropriations, but you can see the governor and the House both coming in under that 2.04. Instead of growing that amount going forward for increase in costs, they had to make reductions, both the governor and the House, to fit within pretty flat revenue estimates. So you can see the general fund shares coming down to under 1.9 billion in the House proposal. When we look at, I won't go into Schedule 2, which Representative McGuire actually went through today. And he did a good job running through that, as well as Representative Irf and Edwards. But based on all the appropriations, if you go to 5, page 5 is the Education Trust Fund, and it's going to look a little different for you. Again, revenues on row 4, the House revenues were under where the governor had estimated. Obviously something that the Senate Ways and Means Committee will be looking at. But even the base revenues on 4 came in under where the governor had assumed. Appropriations, the governor and the House were about the same until you get to Schedule 4 adjustments on 10. And you can see there was a big, almost a $25 million increase in appropriations, off-budget appropriations that the House assumes that the governor did not have in her proposal, and that's based on updated estimates for adequacy, charter schools, and EFAs. So in order to true up 25, and will actually most likely occur based on what the Department of Education is seeing, that required an additional draw or additional Education Trust Fund appropriations. So the current year balance under the House proposal for the Education Trust Fund was a negative 64.3, result of revenues under plan, but also the result of those additional appropriations that are required to satisfy adequacy charter schools and EFAs. So the different cumulative ending balance in 25, you can see the governor had about 128.9, House had 71.8, so almost a $57 million swing down, mostly because of those revenues and those additional appropriations. But still a positive balance of $71.8 million that carries forward into 26. Education Trust Fund is a non-lapsing account. $71.8 million in the House proposal carries forward. You see the revenue go down to 886.5. There's nothing, the drastic thing that's happening here is an accounting change. You heard Representative Irf mentioning how the House had restricted lottery revenue specifically for adequacy. Since it is restricted, it does not show up on the Education Trust Fund. It's when you look into your compare report, when you get to the DOE portion of the budget, you'll see a new line of sweepstakes revenue specific for adequate education. And those are amounts for about $255 million in 26 and about $292 in 27. So, but overall, even though it looks like the revenue through the Education Trust Fund is down, it's actually up from where the governor had assumed. The same goes for expenses on lines 8 through 12. Total appropriation and the governor in 26, 1.278. See the House drops it to 941.8. That's what's coming from the Education Trust Fund because the other 255 million or so is from restricted lottery revenue. Same thing for 27. So cumulative ending balance in 26, about 14.6 million in the Education Trust Fund, carries forwards into 27. Another adjustment you can see on row 4 is the revenues were down below the governor by about 72 million. In addition, you will see on row 5, $312 million of formerly classified Education Trust Fund revenue that has now been two places. 172 million of that has been dedicated for adequacy. And that is pre-VLT revenue. You won't see VLT revenue in this Education Trust Fund sheet because it's all accounted for under the adequacy line. And then another 140 million from those splits from the business taxes. Total budget appropriations under 9 or 09 is 958.1. Again, they do have another $290 million that is included in the adequacy line of sweepstakes revenue. So in total, although it looks like the House appropriated under what the governor did, they actually are over what the governor appropriated by about $20 million for the upcoming biennium. And Mickey Landergren will have a sheet for you when you get to DOE, just kind of show you the movement of all this money and where you are in adequacy, because you will be discussing that as you go forward. Based on the revenue splits is one of the big pushes and one of the big draws from the Education Trust Fund in 26-27. It does result in a negative Education Trust Fund balance of $26.6 million at the end of 27, which is automatically filled by the general fund. So that 26.6 you can see back on page 1 is a general fund cost. The House, their goal was to get the general fund, the Education Trust Fund as close to zero as they could by the end of the biennium. And that's why they came to the splits at the 70-30. So that's kind of where you end up right now as it comes to the Senate. Obviously, a lot of changes for revenue. That's going to be the number one look is on your 25 revenues, which will then factor into your base for 26, 27 going forward. VLT revenue, that's video lottery terminal revenue, depending on what the Senate decides to do, those revenue estimates will impact your Education Trust Fund spending and your education spending overall. And then you can see your general fund revenues. If you want to go with the governor's splits, if you want to keep the splits as they currently are between the General and Education Trust Fund, or if you want to go to where the House is. But that's something we can work with you over the next few weeks to get there. But so the House is a balanced budget, and that's the purpose of the surplus statements, to show a balanced general fund, and it is a balanced budget proposal with a deposit back into the rainy day fund after a draw in 25. Real high level on highway and fishing game.
Before you go there,
Sure. I'll stop.
Senator Lang has a question, and Senator Bertzel next.
Sure.
Thank you for taking my question. So I'm interested again on page 5, looking at line 18, then that $26.6 million deficit to the Education Trust Fund. Is there any way to predict that out for the next 2 years to see, making some reasonable assumptions to see if that's going to be a trend or is that a one-off? That number.
Yeah, the
that
number
20
26.
Yeah.
My guess.
If we make all these changes, I guess I'm trying to see what the long-term effect of making these changes, if it's going to continue to show a growing deficit in the Education Trust Fund.
Not necessarily. I can work with Mickey to see if there's any way we can predict out, because what's going to alleviate any draw on the Education Trust Fund is if the Senate decides to do video lottery terminal, is what you project in a full year in 28 and 29 going forward. And is that going to offset the other revenues going into the Education Trust Fund? So, but we can take a look at that for you and try to project as close as we can if that's a continuing shortfall.
Thank you.
Sure.
Senator Birdsall.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. Did the House do anything to adjust for the YDC lawsuit or Met Dish?
So for nothing in the Met Dish, the House kept the Met Dish payments as the governor had proposed, which is I think 80% of the Met back to the hospitals. As far as YDC, the House had appropriated $10 million a year.
That's just for that one event.
Yes. And the other thing is YDC Claims Administrator still has the ability to come to fiscal to draw down or request general funds if there is an additional need. So as the House was debating on how much to put into the YDC settlement fund, they were comfortable with the $10 million a year, but understanding that they were also putting $85 million in the rainy day fund, so there could be some wiggle room there in the event they did want to appropriate more money through fiscal to YDC.
Just in case anyone is confused out in the internet land, there's $10 million goes into the YDC fund. But there's always also a $10 million settlement that would be funded in the first year.
Yes. The Attorney General requested a $10 million settlement. It was over, there's a threshold in statute of 1/4 of 1% of general fund revenue for the most recently completed fiscal year, which is about a $4.5 million number. Any settlement the Attorney General enters into over that amount requires legislative appropriations. So the Attorney General reached out to the Senate President and Speaker to request $10 million for YDC case, the Gilpatrick case, which was settled earlier this year contingent upon the legislature appropriating the money. So in the House proposal, they did appropriate general funds towards that.
Okay, additional questions before we let him go on?
No, again, so there's
Senator
a $10 million for the specific settlement.
Yes.
And then there's another $10 million that's just for all the other settlements through the.
Yes, $10 million a year into the YDC Claims Administration Fund, correct. So in total for the YDC claim, it's about 30 million, 10 for the settlement specifically for that one individual, and then 10 over the next 2 years, 10 each year.
All right, Senator Waters.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry I had to be over at endless bill hearings, but here I am, and so this may have gotten addressed, but would you go back to page 3? And this is on line 4, the dedicated fund annual assessments. So there was some conversation around, what funds and so on and so forth. Are you aware of any of the funds that might be assessed, that there might be legal restrictions on whether we can do that assessment to them?
I am not. Specifically, I could tell you a little background behind the assessment is there's close to 400 dedicated funds. The House exempted, there's in House Bill 2 is a list of the funds that were dedicated. I think it's probably 50 or so funds that were not assessed this administrative charge for various reasons. One could be just the amount of revenue they were bringing in, or they had a negative balance in the fund. It was appropriations made to that fund from the general fund, so you don't want to take a double hit, but none of those decisions were made based on legality. So they more based on kind of just operational. They didn't want to go after, if it's 100% federal funds, if it's unemployment trust funds, that's just going to result in increased assessments on the employer. Some of those, they made the decision, but as far as legal, nothing specific.
If I may follow up. I think the ones that have come to my mind are the fish and game funds. And since that's just the way those funds are structured, and since it's a self-funded department, whether or not in some of those we would be able to, I think there's some things that are from federal sources that.
Yeah, I'd have to look at the specific fish and game ones and kind of the type of revenue sources that go in there. And if there are any restrictions, the committee should be very wary of going after anything that includes federal funds that you're not able to assess. So as you're looking at this, as we're going through all those funds, you'll probably hear a lot of them at the public hearing. For anything with a question on whether or not it's legal would be something that if you keep this section in, you want to exempt those. So,
sure. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rosenwald, you had a question?
Wouldn't the opioid abatement settlement funds be problematic for us to sweep?
So I think there's, for the opioid abatement trust fund, although they're not subject to the 5% assessment, they are actually exempt. There are a couple of draws from the opioid abatement trust fund proposed in the governor and proposed in the House. It sounds like there is, the Attorney General and the Senate Legal Counsel are looking into that. That was something the House looked at very briefly, whether or not they had legal counsel based on the terms of the settlement. And I think Representative Edwards had mentioned that as long as it's reported back to the entity, at the time, the House was okay moving forward with those sweeps, but it's definitely something I would recommend the Senate ask legal counsel to clarify that it's not going to, number one, it's allowable and it's not going to impact any future settlement payments the state receives. So.
Okay, on to highway, was it?
Highway, onto the highway fund. So highway fund, there are smaller surplus statements. And I'll go really high level here. As you know, the highway fund has been struggling with flat revenue from gas tax over the last several years. Expenses, as we know, do not go down. So what the House decided to do is to increase fees, and you'll hear a lot of motor vehicle fines and fees have been increased, as least as proposed by the House, to the tune of about $45 million over the biennium. Sure, it's a one-page.
Oh.
Yeah, there's two. So there's a highway and then a fishing game on a similar format. So in total, when the governor's budget had passed, the governor had assumed $0 in the highway fund at the end of 27. The House had looked at the expenditure level, looked at the draw in the highway fund from the winter maintenance for the last two fiscal committee meetings that were not included in the governor's proposal since they occurred after the budget was presented, and decided that they needed to either make some funding reductions or some revenue increases to the highway fund, or to consider providing some general fund support. The House was not in a position to provide additional general fund support to the highway fund, so they did raise motor vehicle fines and fees. On row 13, you can see the increases associated with those. About $45 million to the highway fund over the biennium. And what that did is it allowed the House to propose a budget for 26-27 with an ending balance on row 37 of about $13 million estimated at the end of 27 from the highway fund. But obviously, you're all going to hear at the public hearing relative to the motor vehicle fines and fees, but that's something you'll be debating. But that's why the House had done that. So that's it for the highway fund. If you have any questions there, but as we get close, we can go through that in more detail.
Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Perhaps I could meet with you, but could you look into what the effect of an 8-cent increase in the gas tax, the road toll would be on the budget?
Sure, yes, we can do that. Okay. And then last but not least is the Fish and Game Fund. That, again, it's a one-pager, very similar in format to the Highway Fund. So in Fish and Game, a couple of things. The governor's proposal had an ending balance of about $1.4 million estimated for Fish and Game. In total, the revenue for Fish and Game stays flat of about $14 million a year from the fees. You heard Representative Erf mention on row 7 the transfer from some of their dedicated funds into the Fish and Game Fund to increase that balance in the fund balance for the end of 25 in order to play out in 26 and 27 for a balanced Fish and Game Fund. The appropriation levels, just based on Fish and Game Department and House Bill 1 and what's actually gone through, very close to the governor's budget at about 17.8 compared to 17.4 from the governor, resulting in a negative balance of $942,000. Gap adjustments really just accounting for revenue or appropriations expenditures after the close of the year of $1 million. So the Fish and Game Fund ending balance estimated about $11.3 million. So that's what Division 2 began 26 and 27 with, is an estimated balance of about $11.3 million. You can see the fees, dedicated account fee increases on row 8 and 27. It was about 383 in 26 and 765 in 27, so about $1 million. Fish and Game Department appropriations went up by about $600,000 because the funding was available from this increase in those dedicated fees. They provided it back to Fish and Game for about $20.1 million in 26, resulting in an ending balance of $7 million. So you had even though the fees were increased in some of the dedicated funds, you have a variance between the revenue and expenditures that continues to grow at Fish and Game. So that's something that Division 2 looked at, but something Center Finance will look at as you go forward on how you'd like to address that. But that was one of the big concerns Fish and Game brought up when they came before you, is just kind of a dwindling balance in that fund. And a lot of that has to do with the revenue, flat revenue compared to growing expenditures. Those expenditures are estimated to be about $20.3 million offset against $14 million in revenue. So you can see that fund going down from about $7 million down to $3.1 million at the end of 27. So that was the still a balanced budget in Fish and Game, but as you look ahead into 28, 29, and you're looking at flat fees or flat revenues compared to growing expenses, this is an issue you can continue to discuss in Senate Finance for the years to come. So,
additional questions? Additional comments?
I have none. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Again, just to keep you all informed, I know Senator Waters and Senator Lang haven't been here, especially when we go through House Bill 2. Every section in House Bill 2 will get a vote. The ones you don't change will get an informal vote just to make sure that you agree with it. The ones that do change, there will be on amendments. Those amendments will get a formal vote. Then we'll collect them all up in the end, and we'll vote on the one that'll go to this full Senate. But every item in House Bill 2 will get a vote, okay? Informal, 196 votes, yes? They can be grouped together, okay, to do things, but you will get either to vote in the affirmative or negative. Again, if it's not a change, then it'll be an informal vote. Everybody agree with that, fine, we go on. But everyone that is a change will be an amendment, okay? The stuff that's in House Bill 1, all that stuff comes in amendments, okay? You'll have the discussion, you'll have spreadsheets in front of you, you'll have all kinds of information for it. You know, you may get sick of spreadsheets by the time we get done, but, you know, that is all going to be voted on, all right? So you will get ample opportunity, and if you don't think you're getting ample opportunity, come see me and we'll figure that out for you. Okay, anyone else have any nickels?
Just a
Senator Bertzel.
question for,
For the
Deb.
one who knows.
Yes. I can't remember. What did you want us to do with these? We just put them back here?
I'll do that. You can just leave everything. You're all set.
Okay.
Thank you. Just leave everything. I'll put.
Unless you want to take it with you, she'll take care of it. Unless you want to take it with you, she'll take care of it.
The presentations go, I will put in your binders, is a file for each.
Okay, so you'll take, okay.
Yeah.
I got my answer. We're gonna stay.
Yeah. I shot some things and I have them. Yeah. No problem.
Thank you.
Okay? Our business of the day being complete, we are adjourned.